when did you start thinking about racism as a religion?
When I made the 9 areas of activity. When I listed those, and the 7th area was religion, and then naturally I had to get into defining what religion is. Strong belief backed up by action, and just by that process, stumble into it. Because then I had to ask myself, okay, well, what is the strongest religion? What's the most prominent religion on the planet, if you go by that definition? Strong belief backed up by action that may or may not have a God at its head, in which case the religion of the white supremacists is white supremacy, and the God of that religion of the white supremacists themselves, according to the evidence. So that's how I came into it. It just evolved just by me seeking to follow the logic. Compensatory logic. I mean, that's how you raise the question. See, it starts with a question. Everything starts with a question. What is a religion? Okay, there are many, many religions throughout the planet. Now, of all the religions, what is the strongest one? And that's what I came up with. So I decided to put it in capital letters, the religion of white supremacy. And there's a statement, with several elements, I think. Now that the question is raised, how did that evolve in my mind? And also there was a white man, I think he's from Alabama, back in the 1960s. And he said, people just ought to stop, having all these arguments and falling out about this thing about race. He said, it ain't nothing really complicated about it. People would just stop getting all emotional about it and just be sensible. And then he followed that up with a statement that I think it kind of influenced me going in the direction of that religion thing. He said, it works like this. He said, God made the white man to serve God. And then he made the nigger to serve the white man. Now, if everybody just leave that alone, everything will work out fine. That's God's will. God made the white man to serve God. And then he made the nigger to serve the white man. Now, what's the problem?
You don't concede when there's theft involved. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you, to the Capitol.
He told all of us to be out there, and everyone was just listening. And we all know with Trump supporters, I mean, they admire this man. This man he's their savior, essentially, other than, our Lord Jesus Christ.
Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
January 6th, it was soccer moms, it was vets, it was truck drivers, it was America. It was America. I believe that Donald Trump was anointed by God. I felt like it was very important to go, stand in support of our president.
USA! USA! USA!
While we were up there, I could see where there were people that were clashing, and I hated to see it. And I also saw thousands of peaceful patriots standing around me.
1776, and we've been screaming, we've been fighting, but now I want you to pray with me.
I turned away from the Capitol to thousands of people that were below that were coming up, and I got their attention, and I was able to pray with them, that God will hear our prayer and heal our land.
A self-described prophet has been touring swing states and recruiting believers to serve as volunteer poll workers and watchers. He helped mobilize Christians to gather in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021. One sign this community is important to the Trump campaign, vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance stopped by. NPR's Lisa Hagan reports from Pennsylvania.
Come on, let's wake in our praise today. Oh, come on, my soul.
The Courage Tour's latest stop was in Monroeville, just outside Pittsburgh.
This isn't a political rally, certainly. It's much different than a revival meeting.
That's the tour's lead organizer, an evangelical media figure named Lance Wallnau. Here he is with his wife speaking in tongues over one of the tour's guitarists.
You have the ability to praise the Lord.
The Wallnaus are just two of several charismatic Christian leaders hosting these revival-style events where Trump is prophesied as God's anointed candidate, according to Matthew Taylor.
Today, President-elect Trump will be sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. His re-election to the presidency is one of the greatest comeback stories in America's political history. It is nothing short of astounding, and I am confident was supernatural, orchestrated by God. Though Satan and Trump's enemies have tried to stop God's purposes, they have and will continue to fail.
The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Now, I'm so glad that I found Jim Jones in time. I'm so glad I found Jim Jones in time. I'm so glad that I found Jim Jones in time. Oh my God, what shall I do? I'm so glad trouble don't last always.
The Cows, Gus T, Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the religion of white supremacy. Today's date, Tuesday, January 28, 2025. So I have been told. Folks that were listening in live, of course, we had some sort of odd tech issues or what have you, and Wi-Fi connection, what have you, but it seems to be working correctly now. Hopefully there'll be no more technical misbehavior, but a little bit. I was really looking forward to my intro, and then connection kind of messed up some of the quality of that, but the archive will be grand. And I am so glad, man, time is right and exact. I first heard about our guests for today's broadcast. I first heard about his book way back in October. I'm way back, relative, right? So way back in October, I heard about this book. So since that time, just, what are we talking, October, November, December, January, 3 months. Not that long, one trimester, right? 3 months. In that time, Gus T's California sojourn, L.A., San Fran, presidential election, Trump wins again, California wildfires, January 6 pardons right after the inauguration. Wow. Just on the basis of those things, and I know there are other things that happened in between there, Luigi Mangione, the Stanford assassin and all that, but just kind of highlighting, bullet pointing things that are really relevant to this here dialogue. Wow, just those things in the past 3 months. Slightly different reading of this here book, and I say that about a whole lot of things. Like, woo, things are at least an asterisk when they do the second printing. Like, wow. scratch all that. Pardon everybody. We'll do it again. We'll do it again. With Trump in the White House, we'll do it again. Great that we waited as opposed to chatting about this in October. Now, let's chat about all of this. What we heard at the beginning, I normally try not to do intros that long, but I could not. There's just so much material just on this one topic. So we start off Neely Fuller Jr., ProduceJustice.com. His concept, the religion of white supremacy, the strongest religion on the planet. That is the way we should conceptualize, think of racism. Wow. We move from that to lots of evidence in support. In my opinion, now, there's lots of footage, documentary, 4 hours at the Capitol. They go through, and you can hear folks saying that it's Trump, short of white Jesus himself, he is the chosen one. Oh my goodness. And then you hear Coy Griffin, white man, he's there, and he said that we just wanted to pray and just pray for Trump and for our country and for a fair election. Lots of that. They had the crucifixes and such, which I hadn't paid as much attention to beforehand, but there certainly are a lot of those crucifixes and such religious paraphernalia on display January 6, 2021. From there, we get to even move into, yes, Trump is going to win re-election, and en route to that, they talk about on the campaign trail, they have all kinds of good evangelical Christians supporting the effort. One of them, Lance Wallnow, out speaking in tongues and such, but supporting the winning candidate. He wins, he goes out, the inauguration, manifest destiny in the 21st century, in the 21st century. And we even had Dutch Sheets, again, talk the chosen candidate. And Satan, the enemies of Trump, they failed. They failed. He was doing that on the day of the inauguration. And then we wrap with Jim Jones, of course. Now, everybody except Jim Jones majorly figured in the book and all that good stuff. Maybe not Mr. Griffin, but he's represented symbolically with a lot of other folks. Wow, so much to chat about. And again, what a great time to chat about all of this in lieu the pardons and term number 2. For Mr. Trump, our guest for today's broadcast, that book that I'm so glad that we waited to chat about. It is titled The Violent Take It by Force, the Christian Movement that is Threatening Our Democracy. And it's got like kind of imagery, if you haven't seen the cover, imagery of the January 6th riot going down. Again, all of this, at least in my brain computer, very different in lieu of all those folks, pardon. Every last one of them. Every last one of them. The author, our guest, he is the creator, writer, and narrator of the Charismatic Revival Fury audio documentary series on the straight white American Jesus. 2 references. How about that? That fellow, white Jesus. Super excited to chat it up about his text, and maybe he'll even clue us in what'll be in the update in lieu of what we now know. Glad to have him on the program. Joining us live, our guest, Mr. Matthew D. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, you with us, sir?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me, Gus.
Thank you a bunch for sharing a bit of your Tuesday evening with us. For our listeners, maybe they didn't get to see you on PBS or hear your report on NPR. Anything you would like to tell folks about who you are and the work that you do briefly, sir?
Yeah, so I am a scholar at a place called the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Baltimore. We're an interfaith institute, a nonprofit that works with academics, that works with congregations, that works with local communities, that tries to diffuse and defang anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and Christian nationalism. And we try to build pluralism. We try to build understanding across communities that are very different, many of them religious, but also we try to include non-religious people in what we do because they're a very important voice in this conversation as well.
That's fascinating. When you were giving your list of different things that your organization is opposed to, and in trying to create what you call pluralism. Unless I missed it, I did not hear racism mentioned specifically. Did you mention racism and I just wasn't paying attention?
Well, we work on racism as well, but I would argue that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are actually forms of racism, and Christian nationalism actually gets wound up with racism in all kinds of complicated ways. So racism is not in our mission statement, but it gets into everything that we do just because of the nature of our society and the history of these traditions.
Okie dokie. I will make a request for this broadcast. I might have to make 3, but at least one. It is very important. One of the ways that I found that individuals classified as white deliberately practice racism is not answering questions that non-white people ask. So my question was, did I miss it? Racism was not explicitly stated. Is that correct?
No, racism is not an explicit part of our mission statement, but as I was saying, I think there is a way that racism is tied into everything that we do as an institute. But no, my book is not specifically about racism.
Wow, that's fascinating too. We'll get to that because I had that as a question also. What is that? Because that's a term I'm not familiar with. You said you're against all these other problems and such, not explicitly racism, but connected to all that. What is pluralism? What is that exactly?
Pluralism is the idea that we are all different in society, that there are all kinds of different types of people in society, and that those types of people can all live together in their differences. So I am personally extremely opposed to racism, but I am trying in our work as an institute, we focus especially on this religious dimension of identity. But in the way that the United States and really global society has worked out, race and religion are categories that are embedded together. They're tied together in very intricate and often very painful ways.
I reckon. Let's see. We'll try to cover as much content as we can in the time that we have you this evening, Mr. Taylor. I guess one for folks who've not read The Violent Take It by Force, or they haven't seen you as of yet, you are classified as a white man. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right on. And you say in the book I'm just making sure it's accurate, you're a California native?
Yes, I grew up in Los Angeles.
Wowzers. Wow, that's it. If we'd had this conversation when the book first came out, kind of at the end of 2024, I would just, blah, blah, blah. Now, woo, wow. Even as I was reading, I kept seeing the locations like, I'm going to have to ask, like, are you or any of the folks in this book been impacted by the fire directly?
I have not been impacted directly because I live in Baltimore now, but my family has definitely been impacted. My brother, who lives in Los Angeles, had to evacuate, and I had cousins and aunts and uncles who were on the verge of evacuating just recently with the most recent fires.
Wow, that is so scary. Wow, wow, that is what I thought just reading the book, because it came up, the air Palisades and all that kept coming. I was wondering some of the other folks from, that you interview and such, like they might be the same thing. Wow, what a tragedy. And we'll have more to say about California's situation. That is a whole different topic with the climate issue. I guess, one, you talk about growing up in your religious efforts and such, religious practice as a young person, growing up in California. What were the demographics of the churches that you attended as a young person growing up in California?
So growing up evangelical up until I went to college, the churches I went to were very white. So, a range of different evangelical denominations and traditions, but very white. When I went to college, I went to the University of California, Irvine, which is actually a majority Asian American campus. And I got involved in a black church on campus. I was attending a majority Asian American church. And then I feel like I have attended just about every kind of Christian church there is. I don't identify as an evangelical anymore for a variety of reasons, but I talk about myself as an evangelical background Christian.
Evangelical background. Okay. Cal Irvine. And when you said he says very white growing up. So were there any individuals classified as black in your upbringing growing up before Cal Irvine?
Yes. Oh, yes. There were. I mean, the thing with American evangelicalism is that even as we talk about white evangelicalism, there are a lot of people who identify as evangelical who are not white, but they often have to exist in majority white spaces because most churches that would classify themselves as evangelical are predominantly white. But there are definitely black families. I went to a private Christian school. There were several black families that attended the school, and in our church as well, there were a few black families, but they were definitely underrepresented, and I don't know that their voices were really welcomed or valued in those spaces.
Dang. Was this like a mega church type environment? Like, how many people are we talking in the congregation?
No, these were medium-sized churches. So the main church that I attended growing up through middle school and high school was probably about 500 people. So it was a medium-sized church.
Okay. Not welcomed or valued, the few black voices in the space. Dang. Okay. And let's ask our guests on the program. Pause right there. You already said that racism isn't explicitly in your mission statement, although it does impact all of the other problems that you all try to address en route to pluralism. We here on this program, racism, I equate that with white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms. Same definition for both. That definition, a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
Yeah, I think that definition is quite accurate. I mean, I would argue that there are a variety of forms of racism, both historically and contemporaneously. But if we're talking about the present moment, yeah, that is the system that has been built. It was built starting in the late 19th century. I mean, parts of it were built well before that, but you had the kind of rise of racial sciences. And those racial sciences in the late 19th century, this is also where anti-Semitism comes from, were themselves often Christian in their practice. And so this is why I talk about that race and religion are embedded in our societies, in our global order, that I don't really think you can tease those things out neatly. I think they're always overlapping. And so when we talk about Christian nationalism, we often are talking about white Christian nationalism, right? And the whiteness informs the style of Christian nationalism. Now, there are other forms of Christian nationalism. There's Christian nationalism in Brazil that is not necessarily driven by whiteness, right? But in the United States, yes, it's often or almost always tied in with these racial tensions, the racism, the racial structures of our very society itself.
Wow. I want to hop to my next question just based on what you said, but just we are talking about the U.S. predominantly in this book, but woo-wee, on my black brother Pele, I know goodness well there is nothing about Brazil that is not connected to the system of white supremacy, racism. Now, I mentioned my California sojourn. Cal Berkeley, they had a seminar on white supremacy and artwork where they brought a white woman from Brazil, and so she segued to talk about the deliberate whitening process, and she threw it out like everyone knew what that meant. And I was like, pardon, what is that? And she took her time to comprehensively break down, and this is a white woman with German ancestors, she said, comprehensively break down. This is the whitening process in Brazil. But that also would be a different program. The Christian nationalism or far-right Christian nationalism, I never use those terms. The term I used at the beginning was religion of white supremacy, and I use that because, in my view, and I'm not a theologian by any stretch, like gee whiz, but my rudimentary, maybe even retarded understanding of Christianity, you can't practice racism and practice Christianity. You can't be, I'm about mistreating Negroes and all of that violates, treat your brother as you see me, and all of that. You're not supposed to be doing that according to my, silly understanding of Christianity. That's why I say, all of that, the Klan, they're going out with crucifix, and that is not Christianity. That is the religion of white supremacy. When white people go out and say, niggers, you all are supposed to be slaves, which they did, that is not Christianity. That is the religion of white supremacy. They will steal the accoutrement of Islam, Judaism, Christianity, anything to support the religion of white supremacy, because white people lie a lot. That's what I'm saying. Is this logical? Does this make sense what I'm saying, Mr. Taylor?
I know what you're talking about. I think I'm a religious studies scholar, so I always have to make my technical distinction. So I would say that Christianity is a human tradition, and Christianity is defined by what Christians do. And if we look at the long span of Christian history, there's been a lot of racism practiced by Christians. There's been a lot of colonialism and abuse practiced by Christians. And I would say that all of that is part of Christianity. I completely agree with you that the practice of racism and belief in racial stereotypes is completely antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. But often Christians have behaved in ways that are completely antithetical to the teachings of Jesus.
See there. See, did I mess it up? Oh, I messed up my mute button there. Much about. See, that's why I'm not a religious scholar. Mr. Matthew D. Taylor is. But he said all that practicing white supremacy racism antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. And in my view, since we've had such a difficult time solving this problem, it's been going on for centuries. Even as you pointed out earlier, we should call attention to that. If you're lying and saying you're a Christian and then you go and chain the doors like Jerry Falwell, no niggers in here, you're not practicing Christianity. You're practicing the religion of white supremacy. Just call it that. Stop all the lying and tricking people and all that. You have black people who want to be, you have black Mormons. Hey, I want to come practice. We don't allow dark people. Just call it what it is. Stop all that lying, because there's a lot of that causes confusion. Some of that in the book too. Let's see. There's one more. It's not really off topic. It's just, it was included in the intro, and then we can get right to it. Wow. I said I went to California for that big trip and all that, and so glad I missed the wildfires. Went down there for Jim Jones, white evangelical minister, California legend. He did not pop up in this book at all, unless I was a little careless or what have you. Do you think Jim Jones, did he at least warrant a footnote in the violent take it by force?
Yeah, I did not touch on Jim Jones. He goes back further than a lot of the history that I'm trying to tell in this book. But in fact, Jim Jones actually comes out of some of the same theological strands that I'm describing in the book. He doesn't really fit into this part of that story. He's kind of a different wing of that movement, but he was actually inspired by some of the same people who inspire the theology of the characters in my book.
Absolutely. Man, that is one. Given all of the details and such, I went to California to research this explicitly. I would say there's a lot more overlap. This is what I wrote down. I'll have to number them because the list got so long, although not extensive. White evangelical ministers orchestrating political and or white supremacist violence. That's one. Two, migrating to California to bolster their religious practice. 3, persecution neurosis. 4, voter fraud. 5, political assassinations. 6, at the 1977 inauguration for Jimmy Carter and posed with Rosalind Carter. I brought that up days ago when Jimmy Carter passed. Like, Jonestown did happen on his watch. I lost count. I think we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Had the number 7 fake healings. That alone, like, oh my God, how did Jim Jones not end up in here? Publicity stunts on the Golden Gate Bridge. And even I got so specific with it. I'm a Jonestown expert now. Amy Semple McPherson is cited in the book, Was Jonestown a CIA medical experiment? He was talking about the threads that connect to Jim Jones to some of the same people in this book. They are mentioned in the book that we read. That's why I said, like, woo! Even just, we can get to the primary, the violence. Jim Jones, white evangelical minister, killed 900 people with his lying fake evangelical ministry, and a California congressman and the San Francisco mayor. Like, that's what I mean, January 6th, and I heard lots of people connect Trump to Jim Jones. That's why I was saying, like, I think Jim Jones could have got a footnote here. Yes?
He could have, yeah. In fact, I would observe that with the Jonestown, if you want to call it a massacre, mass suicide, I mean, it's a messy story. I think one of the things that we have not reckoned with in American culture is Jonestown. And obviously, that was covered in the news at the time. I think a lot of people today are not even aware of what happened at Jonestown, of how this kind of charismatic figure, right, who has a narcissistic complex, who thinks that he hears from God, or at least claims that he hears from God, leads this whole community of people astray, guides them to the point of committing suicide at his command. I mean, that in many ways, I think that is a harbinger of some of what we see and what I'm describing in my book.
Not to sidetrack us with Jonestown, but just thought it was, hey, it is a California story, and political assassinations, all that. It's lined up perfectly. I do just every time, just being factually accurate. 900 people plus were killed at Jonestown. Approximately 300 were children.
Yes.
300 children did not commit suicide because they were committed to the cause of the People's Temple. That is total nonsense. Some of them were 5, 3, 1, 12. They don't even know what socialism is or any of this other nonsense. And they were under armed guards. This is like murder. And this was said in the newspapers at the time. This was said immediately and by lots of folks. How do children commit suicide? Were they going to drink Kool-Aid? Like, come on. Anywho, Jonestown for later. Yes, needing to be, and that's another one, reckoned with truthfully. Let's not absolve that white man because it would be very different to be saying Jim Jones mass murderer. They don't say that. They just say mass suicide. That is, come on. Let's see. The violent take it by force. The Christian movement that is threatening our democracy. Why is that the title of the book, Mr. Taylor?
So the phrase "the violent take it by force" actually comes from the mouth of Jesus, at least according to the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus is referring to the persecution that his cousin John the Baptist is experiencing, and he makes this cryptic comment that since the days of John the Baptist, which he's living in the days of John the Baptist, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. And this has been a verse that has befuddled Christian interpreters through the centuries. Is Jesus advocating violence? Is he seemingly describing the suffering that will come on his followers? But as I was studying and researching January 6th, this verse kept showing up all over the place in Christians' social media posts and their conversations and the things that they were saying on videos as they headed into January 6th. And the way that they interpreted the verse, they believed that it was a mandate for them to commit spiritual violence to take the kingdom of heaven, by which they understood the Trump administration to be the kingdom of heaven, to take that back by force because they felt like they were suffering violence in their belief that the election was being stolen from them.
I was not aware that this was a biblical verse at the time that I first became aware of your text. And I think that's kind of important, something that you really drilled down on later on in the book, that when you look at January 6th, these folks are inspired because they think they are soldiers of God. Yes, violence inspired by God.
Yeah, they believe that they are spiritual warriors, that they were battling back demons that were orchestrating a conspiracy to steal the election.
I guess in the subtitle, the Christian movement that is threatening our democracy. Why is that included?
So the movement that I'm describing and following and tracking and trying to offer a little history of in the book is an obscure movement for not as many people have heard of it. It exists within evangelicalism. It's really a set of leadership networks, and it's called the New Apostolic Reformation. And it's a network that emerges in California, really. It's centered in California, at least, in the 1990s and early 2000s, around a seminary professor named C. Peter Wagner. And in the book, I show how Wagner's inner circle, his closest mentees, even though he dies in 2016, 4 years before the Capitol riot, his inner circle are just instrumental to orchestrating and organizing and mobilizing Christians to show up on January 6th, to believe that they are there in the cause of God, in defense of the kingdom of heaven, and in order to put their avatar, their Christian supremacist avatar in Donald Trump back into office, and to take back America, as they would put it, for Christianity.
This is one where I had a question, especially since you mentioned like there are different types of Christianity and all the rest of it, and the lying, saying you're a Christian and you don't do what Jesus said. Not white Christian movement that is threatening democracy? You don't think that would have been more accurate?
No, I actually don't. When we talk about Christian nationalism, I would say that if you add the modifier white, then you are describing a particular kind of Christian nationalism. The movement that I study is fairly multi-ethnic. Now, there's a lot of racism still within there, and I would argue that you could say that there's a level of whiteness that gets integrated into the way they conceptualize Christianity. But many of the leaders who are part of this movement are not white. You have Latino leaders, you have Asian American leaders, and you have some African American leaders who are even within that movement participating in those networks. And so, at least in their self-identity, they're not overtly racist. And as I said, there's still a lot of racism within their networks and communities, but at least in the way they present themselves, they are what I call Christian supremacists. They think Christians should be prioritized over everyone, and most of these leaders will be quite happy with Christians of every race being prioritized over everyone else and really ruling over society as Christians.
They're making me work with my mute button. I'm trying to process that. I guess I'll do it this way for the people who maybe are listening, because you mentioned in the book that a lot of the leaders and such that you talk about in the book, these are not maybe household names that everybody would know, the way that maybe Jimmy Swaggart from years ago, or Jim Jones from years back, where more people would be familiar, like, oh, yeah. So let's see. Paula White, is this a white woman?
She is, yeah.
Okay. We had him in the introduction, Lance Wallnow. Is this a white man?
He is, yes.
Okay. Dutch Sheets, for attentive listeners, also he was in the introduction. He did the 15 minute, give me 15 minutes. He does the prayers. He's a big character in the book. Is he a white man?
He is, yes.
Okay. Cindy Jacobs, she's one of the main characters in the book too. Is she a white woman?
Yep.
Okay. C, as in the letter, Pete Wagner, really super duper important character, like mentor to so many of these folks in the book, maybe everybody. Is he a white dude?
Yes, he is.
Deceased, but okay. I emailed Mr. Taylor today. I don't know if he's in the hellhole that is Baltimore, according to our now two-time president. I am in Seattle, Washington, other side of the continent. I did not know that Sean Foyt came to Seattle, Washington, where we had the CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, way back at the beginning of the COVID crisis in 2020. I had no idea. He came up here to do this whole, I didn't know who Sean Foyt was, so I guess we start there. And then I didn't know he came here to Seattle to do his whole, warrior soldiers in the army of God thing, what have you. Still learning. Is Sean Foyt, is this a white dude?
Yeah, and in fact, I would argue that a lot of what he was doing in 2020 was some of the most racist stuff in the book. He was actively bringing his kind of worship troubadour road show to places where there were Black Lives Matter protests and trying to play loudly over the protesters and often provoking a backlash. I mean, there, as I said, race is everywhere embedded in these things, but I don't think that I would call the whole movement a form of white Christian nationalism. I think it's a little more complex than that.
Okay. Becca Greenwood, another really important white woman, author, pivotal in all the writing. I'm saying she is a white woman?
Yeah, as far as I know, that's her identity.
Okay. And then we got Che Ahn, non-white male, right?
Yeah, he is Korean American. He immigrated to the U.S. as a child from South Korea.
Okay. And you touch on that. You go into detail. You got to interview him too, right, Che Ahn?
I did, yeah. I got to interview him once.
Okay. Just the folks that I just mentioned, they get talked about in great detail. Mr. Taylor gives lots of information. As I said, I was ignorant about all of these people prior to reading the book. But as I said, everybody I named except one is a white person. That, to me, yes, religion of white supremacy, racism. And in fact, it reminds me, even though it's the reverse, of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, because people would say, it's multiracial, it's multiracial, it's multiracial. It is not. It was predominantly black, and the power structure was white. The power structure is white, and it's predominantly white, even though, yeah, you do have some non-white people in there. But I was sitting here looking like, is T.D. Jakes going to pop in here in one of these chapters? Like, yeah, leading the chart. Or they got another black person or something. No, it's just lots of white people. Unless I missed it, I got Che Ahn, but it's just lots of white people that are doing all this unless I missed it.
Well, so T.D. Jakes actually is mentioned in the book because he was a mentor to Paula White. She actually came up more in the realm of black Pentecostalism. She was one of the rare white preachers who really thrived in black Pentecostal spaces. The church that she currently leads, at least when she took it over, was a majority black megachurch in Orlando.
Oh, that was... I didn't know anything about... I learned so much reading your book, Mr. Taylor, but with T.D. Jakes, he's not mentioned like one of these other folks and taking over, and particularly, I guess, because you didn't have black people in this same kind of role leading the chart. That's why I said it should be white Christian movement, because there is no T.D. Jakes there. You don't have hordes of black people out, yeah, we're going to lead our congregation. But I mean, you even point that it was only like 9% of black evangelicals went for Trump. That's why I said just call this what it is. White, really, the religion of white supremacy. If the racism is infecting all of this, and if that's really what is motivating a lot of this, which it seems like it is, just call it that. But I digress. Lost my place. Oh, God, yes. The social, oh, got that too. You have a great quote. This is, make sure I get it correctly. This is on page 15 of the text. Actually, it's on page 10 of the book. I have the book, I have the hard copy, I have the audio book, and I use them all to read this book. So this is on page 9 to 10. You write, as someone who grew up proximal to the NRA movement and who has the theological and academic background to make some sense of it, I felt a certain responsibility to write this book. My analysis is rooted in the disciplines of religious studies, theology, and history, and I make every effort to be even-handed. But these pages do not contain some dispassionate arm's-length rendering. The book's very title should signal that I am out to warn against these ideas and hyper-politicization of charismatic theology as civic menace to American democracy. Yet I do not disdain these leaders. Given my background, I sympathize and even on some level identify with the NRA leaders and followers. I know how electrifying and life-altering and exciting new theological paradigm or charismatic experience can be. I understand how perceived manifestations of the supernatural as mediated through truly captivated, talented human beings can inspire deep-seated devotion. And I thought that was important too, just because you're... Well, let me ask this. Have you talked to any of these folks that you write about to see if they got your empathy with them? Have you spoke with any of the folks who've read this book?
None of them have been willing to talk to me since the book came out. So I have crossed paths with a couple of them. Lance Wallnow has gone after me a few times on Twitter, but no, they have not been willing to talk to me more recently.
Maybe they didn't feel too much sympathy from old Mr. Taylor. I love it. Okay. Any hoodles. He writes, this is also introduction and important, but he at least did try to make the overture record. And he did get to talk to a lot of these folks, so maybe they'll let it go once the book is older. He writes, this is a little bit later down, page 12 of the book. Experts in political violence and democracy tell us when a surge in violence threatens the democratic order, as we saw on January 6th, that violence is merely the tip of the iceberg. The relatively small group of people who actually commit violence is only the visible outcropping, one that indicates the existence of a much larger mass of people who participate in the discourse of violence, believe violence is necessary, imagine and cheer on that violence, and support the people who commit it. I can even add now, and pardon that violence. Wow, I thought that was so, it has been pardoned, so it's now, what violence? What are you talking about? These were patriots. I guess, yeah, can we get a, now answer that question in lieu of pardon for all of this, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we are experiencing right now, and I make this analogy intentionally, if you recall back after the Civil War, right, you have Reconstruction, and then you have the white Southerners reasserting their control over the South, and we talk about that as the lost cause narrative, right, that the North won the war, and the South won the propaganda battle afterwards. And I think that Donald Trump's claims about the 2020 election have been another lost cause narrative in microcosm that has radicalized many Christians, that has radicalized many of the militia movements, that has radicalized many white supremacists around Donald Trump, has united them around him. And now that he is back in office, he is rewriting that history actively from the top of our government in pardoning these folks who committed violence on January 6th, people who beat up police officers, people who were attempting to overturn a genuine and legitimate election, people who were trying to overthrow, in ways, our government. They've now been sanctioned, and I worry greatly about what those people will do now that they have a sense of impunity and they know that dear leader will protect them.
Ordained by God, leader, and woo, that is, wow. What does the politics of white violence? Dr. Sean David Long was with us last year. Oh my, everything is different with those pardons on all this. Like, woo, you have to rewrite everything. Is this Christian rage? Because I had never really heard that term before. What do you mean when you use that as a concept, Christian rage?
Well, I mean, as I was saying, I think that Christianity as a human tradition has often departed from the teachings of Jesus and the model that Jesus set. And I think you can go back through history, the long history of Christian rage against Jewish communities, rage against Muslims, rage against ethnic minorities, rage against colonized people all over the world. I mean, there's been a long history of Christian supremacy, of Christian imperialism, and I would say that January 6th actually fits within that trajectory of the Christians believing that they are entitled to control. And I say this as myself a Christian, but we have to be honest about how Christianity has played out and how often Christians have justified their own will to power in theological terms.
That's another one in terms of being white. You as a white man, I think it's important to talk about how individuals classified as white have used all sorts of religious accoutrement and really anything else to support the system, religion of white supremacy, racism. I hadn't thought of it this way, even though now this term I am familiar with, even though again I'm no religious scholar. Prosperity gospel. I heard that before, that God does not want you to be bedraggled and out bumming quarters and nickels and, sleeping on park benches, fooey to all that. He wants you to be doing great and get that Bentley and, be looking great and showing off all your wealth and how God has blessed you. Heard all that, got it. I had not thought of make America great as a prosperity gospel, and Trump is just kind of stealing from some of the white evangelicals, their kind of shtick when they go out and do all this. But you kind of present that, hey, maybe, especially since it's worked 2 times, maybe we should think of it as a prosperity gospel, maybe.
Yeah, and in the chapter, the first chapter, where I'm looking especially at Paula White, who is Donald Trump's closest spiritual advisor, has been that for more than 20 years now, has been his kind of personal spiritual advisor, his personal pastor. She has really drawn out of Trump something that I think was already latent in him, this kind of televangelist vibe that he has. I mean, he's been tracking televangelists most of his life, has been paying attention to them. And I would say that there are actually several, or at least, or even many prosperity gospels that have come about. Some of them have a more charismatic kind of background, and I would argue that Paula White is very much a prosperity gospel preacher in that sense. But I think that Donald Trump's Make America Great Again message is a prosperity gospel, a nationalist prosperity gospel that says America is entitled to its own selfishness, and that Americans should lean in to that selfishness. I think almost always implied in the way that Trump uses it is white Americans, white American Christians should feel entitled to power, and that when you talk about make America great again, well, what is the again, right? What is the restoration? I think they're talking about pre-civil rights movement, right? They're trying to go back to what they would call a simpler time when white Christians reign over America in an uncontested manner.
Context, really, religion of white supremacy. Again, our guest, Mr. Matthew Taylor. Now I have to ask about Paula White a few times because, I'd never heard of her before, so I didn't really know any of this messed up girl from Tupelo, Mississippi. And then I'm reading all this, like, what? She was on BT? Like, what? Like, it really messed with me a couple different ways. But, okay, to segue, Paula White being on BET, this white woman whose last name is White. You talk about talking to some of your own black friends, that's the term used in the book, in Baltimore, about their experience with Donald Trump and all of this and blah, blah, blah. Have you had difficulty, like when you talked before when you were at Cal Irvine and you went to black churches and such, have you had difficulty in Baltimore and such going to talk with black people about Donald Trump, racism, the evangelical experience, any of this? Have they said, hey, I'm kind of suspicious of white people, Mr. Taylor, I don't really want to talk to you, and, you just look like one of those suspicious, maybe racist white people? Have you had that problem talking to black people?
I have not had that problem in Baltimore. The black communities, especially the black churches that we work with, but we also work with some predominantly African-American mosques. They've been extremely welcoming, and I mean, I'm not coming in there saying anything that I think is shocking to them. I'm highlighting the ways that white Christianity and these Christian supremacist movements have tried to claim power. And I think that in many ways the black church has been a bulwark against this move towards Christian Trumpism and has held the line and said, no, this is not adequate. This is not living up to the teachings of Jesus.
Their holding the line has not seemed to impact white people, the white evangelicals, too much. That's kind of an insular thing, I guess. So Paula White, it seems like she didn't have much of that difficulty either. That's why I started with you personally. And you did you have a problem in California at Cal Irvine? Was it difficulty there when you started going to black evangelical churches and such?
Well, I was actually attending an African Methodist Episcopal church, and no, I had a fantastic time in that church. They actually met on campus. I got to know the pastor, and it was one of the most wonderful church experiences of my life the time that I was attending there.
Wow. Okay. It's I don't know, but I mean, from what you've read, it seems like T.D. Jakes and the black people at BET maybe had the same kind of roll out the red carpet welcome for Paula White. Like, did it seem like anywhere with this? Whoa, we don't trust you. Got a white woman from Mississippi, no less. Like, whoa, get out of here. Did you see anything of that nature?
Well, I think right now, since her association with Donald Trump, Paula White has burned a lot of bridges of trust that she built with the black community. I mean, she really was a trusted figure, especially in the more charismatic Pentecostal sections of the black church. She was a very trusted leader and teacher. And as she moved closer and closer to Trump's inner circle, and as he moved into his presidency, the black communities that I have engaged with have experienced a real disillusionment with her and have seen, in many ways, I think, her true colors.
That phrase is in the Word, God. When I read about Paula White, and as you detailed, like some of her black friends, I guess, congregation members, however you would be phrased, when they start seeing her endorsing Donald Trump, and they are, dare I say, confused. Whew. I had so many thoughts run through my mind. I'll ask here, I should have asked the question before I brought that up. Mr. Taylor, who do you think is more informed about racism, white supremacy, what it is, how it works, what it means to be classified as white? Do you think non-white people are more informed about what racism is, how it works, what it means to be white? Or do you think people classified as white, like yourself, are more informed?
Oh, no, I think that people who are non-white have a much clearer understanding of race and the racial hierarchy than white people. I think the luxury of white privilege, of being in the majority and having that status means that white people often don't have to think about race. Then they can avoid it. And I think in many ways the people who have experienced the deprivations and pain caused by our racial categories are much more keenly aware of those categories.
If that's, I guess if that's the case, then, I'll take it right from the book. So this is page 46, The Violent. Love the title, The Violent, Take It by Force. Although you did steal it from Jesus. So, I mean, yeah. I don't give you two. Yeah, Jesus, great one from the Bible. A televangelist in the White House. This is on page 46, actually. A few days after White assumed this new role in the Trump administration, while the news was still fresh that a charismatic televangelist had joined the White House staff, I helped to gather a group of Jewish and Christian Baltimore clergy and congregational leaders on the completely unrelated question of congregational security. This was in the wake of a growing number of shootings at synagogues and churches, and we thought it important for pastors, priests, and rabbis to think collaboratively about issues of congregational safety during a rising tide of violence and attacks. A friend and colleague of mine, black, independent, charismatic bishop who leads a network of congregations, attended the event, and his response to the safety prompt took me aback. Our black congregations don't worry too much about violence and attacks. We're black people in Baltimore. We live with the threat of violence every day. What really worries people in my congregation right now is Paula White. I'm pausing right there just because that was my response when I read this. I said, wow, for Charleston, South Carolina, the Charleston AME 9, like, whew, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, like, I hope there are black people in congregations who do worry about safety, even if you do live in a place that is, damn, maybe for the people in Buffalo, even though Tops is a grocery store, maybe that's even more of a reason to worry about safety. But I mean, wow, that is not a glowing endorsement for Baltimore. It continues. I wasn't sure what he meant, so I asked him to elaborate. The people I minister to have spent years and years watching Paula White, following her ministry and learning from her, he told me. Now she took this White House job working for that man. Sorry. And my people are in a genuine crisis of faith. I have congregation members in tears telling me, I thought Paula White was filled with the Spirit of God. But if she can go and serve Trump, I don't know what it means to be filled with the Spirit of God. As far as I can tell, these small pockets of predominantly black independent charismatic communities have been the only significant chunk of fourth quadrant that's resisted Christian Trumpism. Wow, I thought that was, I'm so glad you included all of that for so many reasons. But man, when I read that, it is very difficult for me to process the response that you just gave. Like, if the non-white people are so smart about racism, why were they so confused about Paula White?
Well, I think in part Paula White became the person that she was because she was vouched for and mentored by T.D. Jakes. He took her under his wing, and he helped sponsor some of her televangelism shows. He brought her to his conferences. And so I think a lot of African-American folks were introduced to Paula White through T.D. Jakes. I've never spoken to T.D. Jakes. I don't know how he thinks about that. He has not been a prominent Trump supporter, but I got to imagine there's some sense of conflict for him about the way that he kind of platformed and gave her such prominence within that community. It's genuinely puzzling to me how she came to such a place of respect within that space. But she's lost almost all that respect now.
I can't say that this is puzzling because I've seen this before. That's why I said Jim Jones, he should have been in this book. Have you seen this before? A charismatic white minister came and tricked all these black people, and then, whoop, they didn't figure it out until they were in Guyana. It's too late then. It should have been in the book. But that's what I mean when I point to, like, dang, how can even T.D. Jakes, like, and he said they watched her for years. They watched her for years. And did it seem like they suspected that she could have been racist, you think, during any of that, all those years?
I did not get that sense. I think there was a lot of trust that they had in her, and that was why there was so much heartbreak and disillusionment when they saw the way that she behaved with Trump.
You mean a white girl from Mississippi might be racist? Woo, man. I guess they didn't see the help. That's what it is. They didn't see the help. We're going to get them. Viola Davis. We will catch them up. I had to get my mind right back from that one. What is the difference between, these are terms used in the text, what is the difference between Christian nationalism and Christian supremacy?
Yeah, so I think that we need to think about Christian nationalism as being on a spectrum. That there are Christian nationalists, and when we talk about nationalism, we're talking about people who are obsessed with borders and boundaries, who is on the inside and who is on the outside, who belongs and who doesn't. And this is why when we talk about nationalism, there's often a xenophobic element. They're trying to push back the people on the borders and say, no, we have the definition of America and we get to lock that down. Now, Christian supremacy is the hardest end of the Christian national spectrum. It is the most ideological, the most organized, and often the most theological part of the Christian national spectrum. And the reality that we're facing today is that a lot of these Christian supremacy movements are actually transnational in their orientation. Many of the same leaders that I'm talking about in this book, the same networks that I'm talking about in this book that helped organize and mobilize Christians for the Capitol riot here in the U.S. were also extremely involved in organizing people and mobilizing people for the Brasilia Capitol riots that happened almost exactly 2 years after our Capitol riots that were, again, trying to reinstate their preferred candidate, Jair Bolsonaro, and trying to keep him in office. So what we are facing right now, I think, is actually more of a global threat, a kind of rising, reborn Christian imperialism that is trying to impose their vision of Christianity, not just on the United States, but on many, many societies, in fact, every society.
My sick white brother, Donald Trump, President Trump, pardon, I got to get back in, I'm rusty. President Trump, he said, manifest destiny, flag on Mars, man. We're not even thinking the whole universe is ours. Whole universe is out.
Well, he also wants to take back the Panama Canal because he thinks it was a mistake to ever give that back to the people of Panama, right? I mean, like I think often people have characterized Trump as a nationalist. I think he's proven himself to be more in the imperialist mode in the last month or so, where he is really focused on how do I expand the footprint of the United States. And in that way, I think he's more akin to Vladimir Putin than some of the more nationalist figures that people have compared him to.
Are there black Christian supremacists?
Yes.
Who are they?
I mean, several of the leaders in the movement that I would classify as black Christian supremacists. In fact, one of Trump's close advisors was a pastor, an African-American pastor in the D.C. suburbs named Harry Jackson. He was one of Trump's Christian advisors, in fact, got very, very involved in helping Trump promote the reopening of churches after COVID. And at least from what I've gotten from people who know him, Harry Jackson himself died of COVID. Shortly before January 6th.
Jeez, man. I'm not laughing at Mr. Jackson because that is not funny at all. Just wow. Like a lot of the other people that you mentioned, like they build empires and schools and have sold CDs and books, and they get invited on speaking tours and have all this money and wealth and influence, or at least a YouTube channel, and Mr. Jackson is deceased. And man, that is so lame. That is so lame. Like, is there a better example? Is there like a black supremacist that's doing well and has got some book deals and maybe get a cabinet position or be an advisor to this administration? Is there a black supremacist, a black Christian supremacist of that ilk?
Yeah, in fact, actually, the niece of Martin Luther King, her name's Alveda King, is very prominent in the New Apostolic Reformation networks, close friends with almost all of the characters in my book. I'm not sure if she ever met Peter Wagner, but she hangs out with Lance Wallnau and Dutch Sheets and Cindy Jacobs and all these people. She's also an advisor. Donald Trump has been one of his closer religious advisors and has been very involved in the circles around Paula White.
Okay, that's Dr. King's. That's kind of... Man, hopefully he'll release those files. Maybe he'll bring her out. When they release those files. That'll be never mind. We got her. I have to go back to get Mr. Jackson because I'd never heard Harry Jackson, Mr. Harry Jackson. Have to go to learn. That is so pitiful that how old was Mr. Jackson when he passed away? Do you know?
I believe he was in his 70s.
That is terrible.
Yeah, and in fact, as far as I can tell, and I have not been able to factually trace this back, but as far as I can tell, I think he might have caught COVID at that same Rose Garden super spreader event where Donald Trump announced Amy Coney Barrett as the Supreme Court nominee. Harry Jackson was there in attendance there, and that was where Donald Trump caught COVID. And it seems like that was also where he got it. So that one event had quite dangerous repercussions for a lot of people.
Wow. I'm so disgusted. Again, I was not laughing at Mr. Jackson being deceased at all. It was just, wow, that is black male privilege. Black male privilege. Matthew Taylor, author of The Violent Take It by Force, and just teasing out that distinction, the Christian nationalism. These are individuals that are more focused on, we just want to focus on things that are happening here, get out of the border, get these folks that aren't even supposed to be citizens and all to get out of here, and the birthright and all that, as opposed to the Christian supremacy. We want the whole universe, Mars, Panama, everything is supposed to be ours, and in our view, in our Christian view of how God has told us the world is supposed to be ordained.
Yeah, and one of the central kind of, they would call it a prophecy because they believe in modern prophecy, and it actually comes from this guy Lance Wallnau that we heard at the top of the show. But one of the central ways they work out this Christian supremacy idea is called the Seven Mountains, where they imagine society as being structured around 7 arenas of influence: the family, education, government, business and commerce, arts and entertainment, media, and they, in each of those, they conceptualize it as a mountain, and they say the top of that mountain is either controlled by God and the Christians or Satan and the demons. In every society, there's these 7 mountains, and they call it the 7 mountain mandate, because the mandate in their mind is for Christians to take over, to control the tops of all of those mountains in every society, so that Christian influence will flow from the top down into the rest of society.
Wow. And again, I'm just going by the leaders that were focused on in this here book. I suspect a lot of this is going to be as white people dictate what white people say this is supposed to look like, this Christian influence from these 7 mountains that are flowing down here. And you mentioned Lance Wallnau. Stop right there, because you have a great line right there in the book. Lance Wallnau says that God spoke to him during the meeting to say that Donald Trump is a wrecking ball to the spirit of political correctness. After the gathering, when Wallnau returned home, he also heard God say Trump is Cyrus. And you break down the whole biblical meaning of that, having this figure who's not really the best Christian per se, but God is going to use them to guide and, fulfill this biblical prophecy and all that. Christian prophecy. What is Lance Wallnau's problem with the spirit of political correctness? What does that even mean to your knowledge?
So, like a lot of people who were initially very excited about Donald Trump, if you recall back this was actually 2015, so Trump announced that he was a candidate for the Republican primary in June of 2015, and I think Wallnau meets him in either September or October. He meets him several times in the fall of 2015. And like a lot of people who were excited about Donald Trump at that moment, part of what they liked was they saw him as a renegade, as somebody who did not observe the niceties of society. And of course, many of the things that he was not observing the niceties were around considerations around race, right? He was saying that Mexico is sending rapists and drug traffickers and all these people, right? And some of them are good people, right? So there was always a thread of racism. And I think that Wallnau has said and done many, many racist things. And so I think that part of it was that he was excited that Trump was taking the gloves off. I will note that Wallnau was in those meetings because it was a black pastor who invited him to be in those meetings. So there's an element of, again, many of the Christian leaders, the first Christian leaders to support Donald Trump, to get around him, were non-denominational, charismatic black pastors who were in some of these same networks with Paula White and Lance Wallnau.
You said some of these first leaders to support Trump were these black non-denominational leaders?
Yes.
Who were the black leaders that were first with? Are they still with Trump now?
Some of them are. So there's a guy named Darrell Scott. He's a pastor. There's a guy named E.W. Jackson, who's quite prominent in some of Trump supporters. And some of these leaders were in some of those first meetings between Christian leaders and Donald Trump. And if you go back and even read some of the news coverage, there's a puzzlement in the news media. But again, Paula White was the one who was organizing those meetings, and she was drawing from the networks of people that she knew, and she predominantly existed in more of the black Pentecostal networks.
Got it. That got Paula White. I see. Okay, we got you. Well, it seems like Donald Trump is able to nab black people like Kanye West and other black people that are his homies. So he does make friends with a lot of folks, it seems. And then Paula White, she can go and bring in her crew too. Fascinating. Okay. And you said Mr. Wallnau, you said he's done and said a number of racist things. That's part of he was excited. That's what the political correctness, like, oh yeah, he's not going to be for all of that. And yeah, this is our guy. Wallnau, why he was so excited about Trump the first time around in 2015 and remains equally excited today. I watched some of his newer content this week. But what other racist things has this Mr. Wallnau done? Said.
So I was in attendance at a big gathering that he organized called the Courage Tour. This was back this past summer, in the summer of 2024. It was framed as a kind of Pentecostal revival tour, but it was only going to the swing states, and it was explicitly organized around voter mobilization. And some of the things that he and a number of other speakers said from the stage were just really steeped in some of these far-right narratives of white supremacy, of white Christianity, of the centrality of white people in driving American history, and a lot of the way that racism manifests these more multi-ethnic charismatic communities is that they will highlight the people who are there who are not white and talk about how they are empowering those people, even at the same time as those people exist within a system that is mostly benefiting the white participants. And this was in Wisconsin. There were a number of non-white people there, but it was overwhelmingly a white crowd.
I've heard that before, even in our conversation this evening. That is, and that is a very important point. Call that racial showcasing. And really, that's the sort of thing that I've seen. Even when you can have a Daryl Scott, an E.W. Jackson, it would be much better for this if Mr. Harry Jackson was still with us. But yeah, you can, have some of these folks be present, but overwhelmingly, this is going to be people that are white. I don't even think, was Daryl Jackson, is he mentioned in the book? Was I that sloppy?
Do you mean Daryl Scott?
Daryl Scott, sorry, thank you.
I don't think I mentioned his name because, at some point there are already 7 central characters, and I was just really trying not to confuse too many people by bringing in a wider cast of characters. I mean, at this point, there are dozens of these Christian leaders who are on these advisory councils around Donald Trump, many of them with ties into the New Apostolic Reformation. It's a complicated world that surrounds him. And I was trying to kind of find a simple enough thread that people could actually follow it.
I could follow, but just the central figures that you focus on, I'm just repeating it for our listeners because I think exactly what you just said, where a lot of times the racial showcasing, racists, people classified as white, they will highlight, we're not all white, this is a multi-race. They did that with Jonestown. It's not all black. We're multiracial. We got white people here too, just the opposite, but it's the same effect. Multiracial when that's not the case at all. They have a few non-white people there, and especially when we're talking about the power positions. The book that we're reading, it's Paula White, Lance Wallnau, Dutch Sheets, Cindy Jacobs, Pete Wagner, Sean Foyt, Becca Greenwood. These are white people, all of them, males and females. They don't even have patriarchy here because we got white women too. And then Cheon. That's what I mean. Like, it's mostly white people on that. So it could have been White Christian Movement on the front title of it. Man, this goes exactly because I have to keep saying this. The COVID-19, you're not going to tell me what to do. Oh my goodness. We talked about that in so much detail for like a year and a half on the broadcast because that was such a big deal, not just here in Seattle, but all in the U.S. You wrote on page 185, I'd have been a lot more excited to read your book if they had mentioned like, oh man, white people being upset about those COVID-19 restrictions is going to be in this book too. Like, oh my God, I would have told way more people to read it. On page 185, to the violent take it by force, the the chapter title, Worship is a Weapon. These Let Us Worship events struck a chord with evangelicals across the nation. After 4 months of COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns, people were tired of feeling cooped up. Churchgoers, especially charismatic churchgoers for whom ecstatic and absorbing communal worship sessions are a core pillar of their spiritual routine, long to go back to their churches. California had some of the most stringent COVID-19 restrictions policies in the country. Particularly galling to avid worshipers in California was a July 3, 2020 mandate from Governor Gavin Newsom restricting singing at all gatherings due to growing understanding of the airborne spread of the disease because this seemed targeted at churches. When I read this, and then you had a number of different incidents, and even Che Anon, non-white male, who were going out and, hey, you're not going to tell us what to do and all that. I said for years, this is another one. This is not an everybody and all equal. This is way predominantly people classified as white. White defiance, I called it. You don't tell me to wear a mask. You don't tell me to get vaccinated. You don't tell me we can't go to church and gather. I make those decisions. You tell these colored people what to do, and they're going to get fired or put in jail, or what are the punitive actions you're going to take. Is this one that you saw that was multi-ethnic, or did you see, it seemed like it was mostly white people out here. You're not going to tell us we can't gather to pray.
So it's interesting because Sean Foyt, who I think has acted in quite racist ways, especially in the way that he, and I talk about this in the book, the way that he takes this kind of premise of, oh, we're going to have this kind of rebellious worship concert tour, but then he takes it and targets Black Lives Matter protests, right? This is the summer of 2020, right after the murder of George Floyd, right? And so but then his self-defense, again, you talked about showcasing, right? He'll say, in almost every one of these stops, the person who did the preaching was a black pastor.
Oh, see.
And so, and then he would point out and like, look at the people in my band. They're not all white, right? So how can you accuse me of being racist, even as he's literally playing over the cries of protest of Black Lives Matter protesters, right? So yes, race is everywhere in this, but it gets messy in the way that they present themselves, and not everyone who follows Sean Foyt is white. I went to a concert that he had on the National Mall right before the election, just a couple weeks before the election, and it was an extremely multi-ethnic crowd, and not all the people from the stage were white. Again, part of the way that the New Apostolic Reformation navigates these racial waters and racial complexities is that it's an international movement, and so they draw heavily on. I've tracked a number of the black preachers who were preaching at Sean Foyt's things and at these events, and many of them are actually African immigrant pastors, and right, so not necessarily as connected to the African American experience, and who share his theology of the seven mountains and of taking dominion over society. And so I think they feel a theological kinship with him, even as what he's doing, I think, is quite racially targeted and harmful.
That is kind of slick, because you pivoted to the concert in D.C. That was closer to the election, and I was specifically asking about COVID-19, which is very specific, because I'm white defiance, not just his regular Mr. Foyt's events. I'm talking about these COVID activities, because what I saw consistently, and it really didn't matter the geographic location anywhere in the U.S., it was way predominantly white people out there saying, we are not going to be told what to do about these COVID restrictions. So was it lots of non-white people, equal numbers, non-white people and white people out specifically at the COVID-19 events with Sean Foyt?
You know, I've looked at videos of them, and I think I want to exercise a note of caution, because the videos are often edited by Sean Foyt and his crew, so they very purposefully highlight the different ethnicities in the crowd and try to make it look very multi-ethnic. But at least if you look at the crowds, if you track the videos, if you look at the people who are there, no, I would say it's pretty representative of the racial makeup of the country.
Wait a minute. I mean, that, I don't know. What does that mean? Like I said, does it look like it's an equal number of white and non-white people present?
Well, so what I'm saying is white people make up about 60% of the country, and that seems to be roughly the makeup of the crowds, at least in the videos. And again, they're in different locations as well, right? When they're in the South, when they're in the Midwest, it's going to be more white. But they took this tour to Chicago. They took it all over the West Coast. They took it all over the East Coast. And in a lot of these spaces, it's a pretty multi-ethnic crowd that shows up for Sean Foyt, including during COVID.
I would have to see that for myself, because you said that a few times. You have that in the text, that it gets muddled with regards to evangelical support for Donald Trump, and it was at about 77% white evangelicals for Trump, 9% black evangelicals for Trump, and then it was approximately 40% Latina evangelicals for Trump. I'm just doing this from memory because I don't have that page in front of me right now, but is that sort
in
of
the most recent election, it was actually the majority of Latino and Latina evangelicals who went. Well, it was the category they use in the studies as Hispanic Protestants or Latino Protestants, but the majority of Hispanic Protestants went for Donald Trump in this most recent election.
I think I saw something to that effect as well, but same thing. That wouldn't even change what I was going to say at all. When I looked at that, I said, how is that muddled? It's 77%, so that's the vast majority of individuals classified as white went for Trump. 9% of the individuals classified as black evangelicals went for Trump, so that's almost none of them, about what I would expect. But that's why they can go and pull these one or two black people and whatever, and even resurrect Mr. Jackson, even though he's deceased now. Well, he's still with us in spirit, that sort of thing, 9%. And then they pull that nonsense with Latina. They didn't even disaggregate, because they know, and I suspect you do too, I'm not a religious scholar, but I do know about those racial classifications. That is not a racial classification. That's why they normally have that tacky add-on of white Latina or white Hispanic, non-white, sometimes they'll even say black. That does not tell me anything. Is that Cameron Diaz voted for Trump? I mean, these could be all people who are classified as white and speak Spanish for all I know. So, whoop, we tossed that one. We got 77% white went for Trump, the white evangelicals. 9% of the black evangelicals went for Trump, and then whatever they make out of the Latina, that could be all white. Like, that is pretty stark. That is That's why I said you could just put on the front, white Christian evangelicals. That's what we're talking about here. We'll grab a few black people from time to time, but I mean, and even that he said, we'll grab black people that aren't even born here. Che-an, he wasn't even born here. You already told us he was born in Korea, wasn't he?
Yeah, he immigrated, I think, when he was about 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, that's what she's like. Come on. They get some old, like, outsourced victims of racism that have probably been subjected to all kinds of colonial missionaries, and they send all those old racist. That's in the book. You got all these people that were going over to do their missionary work in different parts of the world, and yes, we got to go talk to the heathens and do our. Even that was what Jim Jones did too. Like, come, and then they bring the product back over here and say, "Oh, we're integrated. We got black people. Look at here. We got this." Don't ask him where he doesn't. His English is like, come on. Let me make sure I get my. Let me see. Got the COVID-19 that was important. Man, it is days removed from MLK. I appreciated this book for a lot of reasons, even though I think there could have been a greater focus on what we're talking about as people classified as white, but neither here nor there. You focus on the violence. It's in the chapter, or excuse me, it's in the title. That's what I meant to say. It's in the title of the text. And that iceberg quote that I read in terms of that's just a small of the minority that were out there being hooligans now pardoned. All of the white support behind them is a part of the reason they got that pardon now is important and should be talked about as well. This is later on in the text. This is on page 190. Let's see. 196. Or I said it right the first time. 195. You write, in the summer of 2021, Sean decided to bring Let Us Worship back to Portland, Sean Ford, to commemorate the first anniversary of the start of the riots to Revival sub-campaign. This was 6 months after January 6th, and tensions were still running high between right-wing and left-wing political groups in Portland. This time, Foyt put out a call for local Christians to come and provide security for the event. Sean and Jay Koopman posed for a picture with a group of men, and many of them clad in tactical gear, whom Sean said were all ex-military, ex-police, private security, and, most importantly, lovers of Jesus and freedom. We hope so. Careful observers noted that many of the men in the group photo were actually Proud Boys, including at least one who was then undergoing prosecution for his involvement in January 6th, pardoned, or members of other local right-wing militia-style groups. Sean joked on social media, "If you mess with them or our First Amendment right to worship God, you'll meet Jesus one way or another." Direct. It sounds so dirty, Harry. Like, make my day. Like, I thought this was supposed to be like a Christian gathering. Like, what is going on here? When I read that, and I said, man, we're like days removed from Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Where is the, like, black theology of this? where you could be a black person and we're armed and we got our guns and we are righteous in violence and vengeance. And if you, like, with black people, it's Dr. King and nonviolence. And nonviolent, like, I can't even think of, are there representations of this that are like mainstream and current, not Nat Turner and way back? Are you aware of this now, that black people are included in this?
No, and that's the thing is I think part of what I have observed even since January 6th, especially on the West Coast, is that there has been a growing convergence between the militia movement and these New Apostolic Reformation and independent charismatic networks. And I mean, you can literally see some of these pastors marching alongside white supremacists. In fact, even in Oregon, I talk a lot about Dutch Sheets and the Appeal to Heaven flag, this flag that he kind of, this American Revolutionary flag that he reappropriates as a spiritual prophecy symbol. And you can see neo-Nazi groups now flying the Appeal to Heaven flag as well. And so, no, that there is a lot of crossover and connection, especially since January 6th, between these networks of militia, kind of renegade anti-government groups that often are explicitly white supremacist, and these charismatic networks. What the befuddling thing about it is often the charismatic networks are like groups that are like Latinos for Trump, right? And so they are often playing with the multi-ethnicity of their groups, and that is used to then give cover to some of these white supremacist undertones of the gatherings and the rallies that they do.
I would have Enrique Tarrio out front for every event. Every time we go out, Enrique to get out there, in fact, we were just told that they would not allow him to go out because he was too dark, that just further made the point for me, because he does have a white parent, even though he is not white. But Enrique, get out there every time and give him what for, Enrique. And then even that, I had to pause because Enrique Tarrio got prosecuted. He's pardoned now, but he got prosecuted for January 6th. He wasn't even there. He got one of the heaviest sentences for that day, and he wasn't. Some of the white people in this book, Real Talk, they should have been prosecuted for what happened on that day. That didn't happen. Let me add, you did more research. Do you think some of these white people that you wrote about in this book, some of them should have been prosecuted for their conduct on that day?
You know, I'm not a lawyer, so I always want to give that caveat, right? I'm a religion scholar. I think what's complicated about the prosecution for those who did not go into the Capitol or commit violence is our First Amendment is very, very capacious and open and allows a lot of room for speech. And I don't know if any of the major characters in my book broke the law around January 6th. They were not the people who went into the Capitol. They inspired a lot of the people who went into the Capitol. Many, in fact, almost all of them, other than Peter Wagner, who had died 4 years earlier, and Sean Foyt, who was still on tour. All the other characters were there on January 6th, but they did not go in, right? And that was actually the bar that the Justice Department used, was did somebody kind of cross the barriers into the Capitol and did they commit violence? These folks inspired violence. They talked a lot about spiritual violence. But as far as I can tell, and again, I'm not a lawyer, what they did was within the bounds of American free speech laws. And I think that's part of the warning that I'm trying to give here is we have afforded so much freedom to religious communities, especially Christian communities in the United States, and said that they really have free reign to engage in this kind of discourse. I also work on American Islam, and my first book is actually on the American Islamic community after 9/11. I know a lot of imams who, if they said anything close to what these Christian leaders said around January 6th, they would have the FBI all over them.
Facts.
And yet, I don't even know if the FBI is tracking any of the people in my book.
Well said. Well said. It did give me pause. You kind of towards the end of the text where you were kind of pondering the meetings that were taking place between some of the White House the first time around Trump administration, before he's going to lose and transition to Biden, and he's trying to fight and keep his presidency, and some of these religious leaders, mostly white, some of these meetings that were taking place, and saying, wow, are they involved? How are they involved? What's going on? Even that gave me pause, whether it's the White House is directing or some of these people are wow, that gave me quite a bit of pause as well for all of this taking place, and all pardoned now, so I guess we'll find out. I think you said they told you they would give you the logs and records for all of these meetings and such for that time period, 5 years after Trump left the White House, but now he's back, so does the clock reset?
That I'm not sure of. So I put in so there was especially one major meeting of Dutch sheets in the group, about 15 of these Christian supremacist leaders who were at the White House on December 29th, 2020 for about 2 hours. And I could not get to what exactly happened in those meetings because they wouldn't talk to me, and because the records, the White House entry logs, are sealed under presidential order. They're part of the Trump Presidential Library. And what the Trump Presidential Library told me was that those would be released 5 years after Trump leaves office. I'm guessing if we ever see those logs, it'll be probably decades, because I think Trump is going to try to hide. And this was an innovation in the Trump administration almost from the start, was that they started hiding the White House visitor logs so that you wouldn't know who was going in and who was meeting there. That in other presidencies, that's been open source. You can just look at those things. But now I'm not absolutely certain, but I'm pretty sure they've reinstated that policy now, and that was definitely the policy throughout the first administration.
Concealment. See there. I had like 2 questions. I think two listeners. All right. Get my last 2 questions in. This is on page 201, same chapter. Worship is a weapon. You write, I am not the first to argue that white evangelicals are not persecuted in the United States. They do have a persecution complex. Indeed, evangelical Christians in the United States frequently articulate a sense that they are being targeted for their faith. In 2016, a survey of American evangelical leaders found that 36% claimed that they had experienced persecution for their faith, while 76% anticipated that they would be persecuted in the coming years. When I read this, I said, man, the group that has the persecution neurosis, people classified as white. Oh my God, like that's the whole base. That's not just like the white evangelicals that support Trump. That's like the whole base of the Trump camp, like white people who are aggrieved and, oh man, we got to take our country back, and these folks are jumping the border, and affirmative action, and just Obama, and all of it is white aggrievement. They have taken over, and we have lost something, and white supremacy isn't what it was, and we want to go back to the good old days and the way it was. Like that is through, and that's even the dude, Jim Jones. They're coming to get us in the CIA. That's why we got to go to Guyana. They're coming to get us, and the media's out to get us, and all that. But I mean, that is a massive part of white culture, white people. They did a study not that long ago where they were asking white people in the U.S., like, who did they think were the greatest victims of racism? And it was, I think, like 36% of them said white people are the biggest victims of racism. Victims of racism, white people. I mean, do you see that same trend in terms of individuals classified as white having what you call persecution neurosis?
Oh, I think that's very true. In fact, when we think about violence, especially political violence, very few people conceptualize themselves in their self-image as an aggressor, right? Very few people are like, I'm going to go and take over and conquer all these people, and I'm going. It's often framed in terms of self-defense, and I anticipate violence, I anticipate persecution, and therefore I have to act. And I think that's very much what we see in a lot of the ways these white evangelicals, and really, I would say evangelicals across the board, have approached living as people of faith in the United States. Evangelicals make up, depending on how you ask the question and set up the survey, roughly 25% of the U.S. population. But Christians make up about 67% 6% of the U.S. population. There is no widespread persecution of Christians, especially not white Christians in the United States. And yet, when you look at surveys of white evangelicals, when they are asked who is the most persecuted group in the country, they will say that white evangelicals are more persecuted than Muslims, than African Americans, than Jews, and like it is remarkable the ways that they rationalize these things. But then when you look at their political behavior, you see what is behind that rationalization.
That is amazing. But again, that is why President Trump, man, now I don't know if he's the best white evangelical, but whatever, we'll just pick him. President Trump says that all the time, that I'm the most persecuted and hated and vilified, and they tried to kill me. You see, he says that even before the assassination. That just really took it over. But even before that, he was saying the same thing. That's why I said it's so ubiquitous in the culture. I'm some sort of victim, and they're out to get me. And I guess, yeah, because I don't use this term either. This is on book page 198. Same basic point in the book. You write, I don't know how else to put this than to say that we are in the midst of an epistemic crisis. Many Trump supporters, not all, particularly right-wing Christians, have become unmoored from reality. From early 2021 to the present, approximately 3 in 10 Americans persistently and falsely believe that Donald Trump won the 2020 election despite a host of legal rulings, congressional hearings, and investigations that showed the opposite. When you say many Trump supporters, particularly right-wing Christians, have become unmoored from reality, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say unmoored?
Well, I mean, to believe that Donald Trump was the winner of the 2020 election, you have to believe that against all the evidence, against all the investigations, against all the reporting, against all of the reasonable studies that have been done on the matter. You have to buy into conspiracy theories. And part of the way that Donald Trump was able to win in this election was that he sold that lie over and over and over. And he had propagandists like Lance Wallnau and Dutch Sheets selling that lie to Christians and saying, this is so important. In fact, if you look in the country as a whole, about going into the 2024 election, it was about 1/3 of the country believed that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Among white evangelicals, it was about 60%. So this is being carried, this propaganda, this message, the big lie is being carried by Christian media channels, by Christian leaders. It's being preached in churches. And that was a big part of the backstory of how Donald Trump made his comeback. And we are still locked in that epistemic crisis. In fact, I would argue that it has become only worse because now the people in power just pardoned all the people who committed violence on January 6th, and they are actively rewriting history. Watch as they go and try to start prosecuting and attacking the people who did the investigating, did the prosecuting of these criminals around January 6th, because when you're in power, you get to write the narrative. And right now, our government is united around a lie.
United around a lie. Wow. I said that. Now I will confess, I was in the minority. I predicted in advance, helped greatly by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, the late, that Donald Trump was going to win the election in 2016. Of course, we were correct. And then 2020, I thought he was going to win re-election. He did not. I was a little suspicious. I did not join any of the thugs at the Capitol, but oh well. And I was especially upset because that was the first time I had ever made an error in picking a presidential election. So I was really disgusted about that. I went with Trump again this time around. He was correct. Now, when he won this time around, I even looked back at 2020 and said, ooh-wee, that's the only presidential election that I have predicted incorrectly. And this sucker Joe Biden couldn't even win. He couldn't even finish his re-election campaign. He had to quit on his stool. Yes, I too am in the group that think, yes, maybe he didn't win the first time around. Either way, he got his second term, and everyone has been pardoned. So yes, lots of folks will look at this like, wow, they were right the first time, which is pretty much what they all have said. Woo, man. And we just got started. He even said they might start prosecuting the people who did this to me. Enrique Torrio, he said that the day he walked out of prison, looking like Andy Dufresne in Shawshank. He said, vengeance, which is what Trump had said all along. He said that all along. Vengeance, they get real I guess they did mention in the Bible. That's like Old Testament. Brimstone and drown out everybody, like vengeance, like, woo, wow. Let's see, our caller, Lauren, did you have a question? I believe she even read the book, The Violent Take It by Force. Did you have a question for Mr. Matthew D. Taylor?
Yes, sir. I do have some questions. Is it okay if I ask more than one question?
Sure.
All right, wait a minute. I'm sorry, I missed it. I thought you couldn't hear me. You said I could ask more than one question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. All right, so in the text, it says they believe that Christians need to conquer the high places of influence in society and govern from the top down, engaged in a cosmic spiritual war against the forces of darkness. They believe God has mandated them to use spiritual violence to defeat Satan and then build the kingdom of God on earth. Question, do you think the forces of darkness could be a reference to non-white people?
I think they would say no. But if you look at the way that they actually operate, I think oftentimes there is a subtle racism in the way that they approach the world, in the way that they approach communities of color, but in their cosmology, right, their vision of the universe, their understanding of the universe, they would say that the forces of darkness are Satan and the demons, and that those manifest through people and institutions. And this movement is so political that they often map that onto political parties. So they would say the Democratic Party is part of this. Now, I will note, often when they're talking about the Democratic Party, they'll say, and cities are centers of darkness. Sean Foyt will say this all the time. Cities, especially Democrat-led cities, are centers of this darkness. It doesn't take too much reading between the lines to note that he is talking about places where there's concentrations, especially of African Americans. And so I think there's always a racial subtext, especially for Sean Foyt when he talks about these things. But at least if you were to ask him, I'm sure he would say, no, there's nothing racist about anything that I just said, because again, that's their self-presentation is that they are a multi-ethnic movement.
But you think it could be a reference to non-white people?
I think, especially in the case of Sean Foyt, yeah.
Okay. Another question. What exactly is spiritual violence?
So in their understanding of theology and of the Christian tradition, they believe that that Satan and the demons are waging a war on God and the Christians, and that there is a battle for control over the world, and that they have the capacity through their prayers, through their prophecies, through their practices like blowing shofars, through their worship music, to do battle, to do violence against those spiritual forces of darkness, those spiritual forces of wickedness, as they would put it, and and they'll use very militaristic language. So even the way that they talked about their presence on January 6th, they would often say, "We are boots on the ground," right? This military term that they are there, and they were stirring up the crowds with language of violence. We need to take back that building that is being held by these demonic forces. So they map their imagination of the spiritual world onto the landscape of American politics and say, we are doing the spiritual battle that parallels the real world political battle that is going on.
Okay. Also in the text, it said, Christian nationalism, the belief that America was founded by and for Christians, has become a catch-all designation for the Americanized spirituality we saw on January the 6th. So my question is, do you think that the people who believe America was founded by and for Christians typically classify themselves as white?
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, white people are the majority of the population. White people are the majority of the Christian population. And yes, I think most of the time, the way that I think about it is this. Think about a Venn diagram, right? And I would say that one circle is white supremacy and one circle is Christian supremacy. And those circles overlap to a great degree. Many of the people who are white and Christian assume that both of those categories are normative and should be privileged, right? Now, but there are segments of each of those circles that do not overlap. There are white supremacists who are not Christian, and there are Christian supremacists who are not white. And that there is there's room within the Trump coalition, at least in the way that he frames it and the way that these folks frame it, for people who are not white to sync up and link up, especially under this heading of being Christian, and then using that to find a position of privilege for themselves in society. Now, I think the vast majority of people, and I think the theological undercurrents are being driven by whiteness and white privilege in these circles too.
Okay. Later in the text, this is, I think, page 31, it said, well, that might be incorrect, but after the widespread movement started, William Branham himself was plagued with health issues and accusations of fraud, diminishing his popularity. His theology, followed by a small but ardent company of devotees, became more fringy, extreme, misogynistic, and racist up until his death in 1965. And I just want to know, what did William Branham do to be described as racist?
William Branham was, especially towards the end of his life, really got into parts of theology that I think many people have never even heard of. So there's an entire movement called Christian identity that actually came out. Gus mentioned Amy Semple McPherson. One of Amy Semple McPherson, who was one of the key leaders of early Pentecostalism in Los Angeles, out of her church, one of her associate pastors actually founded the Christian identity movement. And the Christian identity movement is the underlying theology of the white supremacist movement. And part of their teaching, and this is part of what William Branham embraced in the 1960s, is an idea called the serpent seed doctrine. And the serpent seed idea is that if you go back in the biblical story, of course, there's Adam and Eve, but the serpent seed idea, and this is not found anywhere in the Bible, this is entirely a concoction, but the idea is that the serpent actually had sex with Eve and produced offspring, and that those offspring were a different race than humanity. And over the course of Christian history, that other race, it originally was more directed at Jews, and it was part of anti-Semitism, but the Christian identity movement takes it and turns it towards all non-white people. And so part of what William Branham embraced towards the end of his life was this idea that white people are functionally not just a different race in the way that we talk about it, but non-human, and part of this line of Satan in the legacy of humanity. So that's what I mean when he really went deep into some of these racist arenas. And in fact, there are some of these neo-Nazi movements who look back to William Branham as an inspiration.
Okay, there's another part where you said it's also worth noting that many of the excited new converts among the Jesus people were Jewish, and they wound up taking over or building new Jewish Christian institutions that led to the creation of the concept and movement of Messianic Judaism, a controversial, predominantly independent, charismatic movement of ethnically Jewish and theologically Christian people. Now, what does ethnically Jewish mean?
So Judaism is complicated because it's both religion and an ethnic identity or a cultural identity, right? That you can, so it's in many ways a contradiction in terms to say somebody is a Christian atheist, right? Because to be a Christian means that, at least the way that most people understand Christian, means you believe certain things. It is not a contradiction in terms at all to say somebody is a Jewish atheist, because Judaism is both an ethno-cultural identity and a religious identity. And it's in that way, it's a very complicated set of layers to Jewish identity. The Messianic Jewish movement is people who identify as Jewish, at least many of the people in the movement identify as Jewish, but they also follow Christian theology. And so they would say they are fulfilled Jews who follow Jesus as their Messiah. Most mainstream forms of Judaism, the major branches of Judaism as a religious community, do not recognize Messianic Jews as Jewish. But almost all Christians recognize them as Christian. So that's what I mean when I say they are laying claim to ethnic identity as Jews. They often take up some of the cultural practices of Judaism, but then in their theological identity, they are Christian.
Okay. These ethnically Jewish people, are they white or non-white?
It's actually a mix. They are predominantly white, yes. But no, there are Black Jews, there are Asian Jews, there are Latino Jews. I mean, the Judaism, because there's the space for conversion, there's a lot of people who are Jewish who are not white.
And that's who you were talking about in the text?
Yeah, well, no. So the majority of Messianic Jews, from everything that I've ever seen, are Ashkenazi in their background and would be identified as white. The category of white, when applied to Jews, is actually a very complicated thing, because I think Jewish people and will say they are white until they're suddenly not. Right? Because anti-Semitism itself is a form of racial hatred, originates within the realm of racial hatred. And there's Jewish folks, and they have a very troubled relationship with whiteness. And it's a very hard topic in Jewish communities, actually.
Okay, and this is my last one. In the text, it says, Wallnow, ever the KG operator, grabbed his cell phone and recorded an impromptu Facebook video where he passionately argued that God had not left Trump. This isn't God exposing something. This is the devil strategically exposing information in order to destroy a candidate, Wallnow told his followers. God can do more with Samson than he can do with Jezebel. God could do more with a carnal prophet. God could anoint the jawbone of an ass and slay his enemies better than he could anoint Jezebel to advance his prophetic agenda. Now, in this text, every time they use the term Jezebel, right here it seemed like they were talking about Kamala Harris. And I'm just, were any white women referred to as Jezebel in the text?
Yeah, in fact, in that case, as far as I can tell, he's actually referring to Hillary Clinton, because that commentary was right after the Access Hollywood tape came out, if you remember, in October of 2016, right before the election, where Trump is caught on camera talking about assaulting women, and so Wallnow is in that video is trying to defend Trump after the Access Hollywood tape comes out, and my sense from what he's trying to say is that Jezebel is Hillary Clinton. In that analogy. Now, when Kamala Harris entered the race this past summer, those Jezebel references just ratcheted up to the nth degree. And Wallnow himself frequently called Kamala Harris a Jezebel, and there were deeply racist undertones to the way that he used that. And he even would comment on her racial identity and say she's using her racial identity to sway people and to be woke and all these things. So like I said, Wallnow traffics in racial subtext all the time. In that specific instance, he was, I think, referring to Hillary Clinton, but he has definitely talked about Kamala Harris as a Jezebel. In fact, I would say that he used that reference far more in reference to Kamala Harris than to Hillary Clinton.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my questions, and I did enjoy the text. It was interesting.
Thank you.
That William Branham fella. Jim Jones one more time. This is CIA, was Jonestown a CIA medical experiment? Shortly after the Wings of Deliverance opened its doors, Jones organized a huge 5-day religious convention that was held in Indianapolis Hall in June of 1956. Headlining the bill was the popular Southern author and faith-healing evangelist, the Reverend Will Branham, and of course the aspiring young preacher Jim Jones, who sacrificed top billing for the sizable crowds that Branham would attract. The event was widely publicized and drew some 11,000 to opening ceremonies. That's with no TikTok. That's crazy. As usual, Jones stole the show, and the new parishioners he recruited into his flock were exceeded only by the dollars he put into his pocket. Jim Jones, man. Jim Jones. He should have got a footnote. Let's see. Octavius in New York, did you have a question for Mr. Matthew D. Taylor?
Good evening. Good afternoon. Greetings, Mr. Taylor. Thanks for your time with us in regards with this book. I had a few questions. One was in regards to the international aspect of this issue. I've read some other articles by other people noticing this trend as well. And one of the things you mentioned today was that this was something that the evangelical group did here as far as promoting and pushing Trump and all these other ideologies, but then they took these concepts and ideas to so-called Latin America. Is this a constant theme also in Europe as well? Because I believe in Germany, I think the ADL, I think it's the ADL, if I'm correct.
AFD.
It's basically, thank you very much. Can you speak to that a little bit in regards to that aspect?
Yeah. So the Europe is a space that is very, very, very secular today. There are not. The United States is distinct compared to Europe in that we have this very vibrant religious culture, especially a very conservative religious culture that is not nearly as true in Europe, that has become very, very secular. But yes, there are New Apostolic Reformation and independent charismatic networks in Europe. They are often linking up with some of these far-right leaders and far-right figures. I have not seen any data connecting them to the AFD party. Of course, the AFD is kind of the descendant party of the Nazis. They're about as close as you can get to the Nazis and still participate in German politics. And Elon Musk called into an AFD party gathering just this past week. I've not seen direct connections between the AFD and NAR networks. I have not looked deeply into it. So it would not surprise me at all if there were connections in there. The New Apostolic Reformation and really all these kind of Seven Mountains networks are very, very good at finding like-minded politicians, like-minded judges, helping their own people get into political positions of power. So often they have an outsized connections and influence over political figures in a number of countries, including in Europe, including in parts of Latin America, including in Asia.
One of the other, and thank you for that, by the way. And I do agree. I do think that they're probably interwoven and connected with the other Western countries, especially the United States. But one of the things you mentioned also is the investigating system. And why do you think he isn't tracking these people and keeping tabs on these people and see this as a threat? Or do they see it as a threat and they're kind of powerless because some of these people are in their ranks?
Yeah, that's part of it. Is I think if you look at the typical profile of an FBI agent, they tend to be white, conservative with very deep sympathies to law enforcement, and often Christian. And so I think this is part of Christian privilege and white privilege in the United States, that when people talk about threats to America, that is almost always framed as non-white and non-Christian people. And yet when we look at the history of violence, especially domestic violence, domestic terrorism, far-right violence, Oklahoma City bombings, the attacks more recently, the shootings and bombings that we've seen, they're often perpetrated by white Christians. And yet that is not a pattern that anyone is noticing. I will note that the FBI was tracking a guy who was in Virginia, a young white guy who was gathering weapons in preparation for an attack, and they intervened and arrested him, and they found out that he had some deep ties into some radical traditionalist Catholic networks. This is, again, a part of these kind of far-right networks. This is more the kind of world of J.D. Vance than the New Apostolic Reformation. But he had these connections, and they were worried that he'd been recruiting. And so they opened an investigation into some of these radical traditionalist Catholic areas. And somebody leaked that to Republicans in Congress. They started holding hearings. They called Christopher Wray, the FBI director, up to testify before Congress, and they published a report about the persecution of Catholics at the hands of the FBI. And that is part of the power structure that keeps these kind of Christian, especially these far-right and extremist Christian groups, protected from law enforcement, because they have very powerful allies who will advocate for them and who will say, if somebody is a Christian, no matter what they do or say, we're going to defend them.
Understood. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Can I ask one more question, guys? Or is there you have a time strain?
There's another caller. I guess if you can make it quick.
Sure. In investigating a lot of these things, did you see anything with how Trump's rallies come across kind of like a ceremony, like at a church? And with that said, I'll mute my line. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually a great question. In fact, I would argue that Trump's rallies over the past decade have become more and more religious events. So when Trump started out, I mean, Trump does not have a deeply pious background. He's been close to Paula White for a long time. I have no sense of what Donald Trump's genuine beliefs are and what his genuine spirituality is. And in many ways, politicians are very hard to read on those things because they have all kinds of reasons for why they do what they do. But over time, he has learned more religious vocabulary. If you remember back in the 2016 campaign, he had all these stumbles when he tried to talk to religious voters. He said 2 Corinthians instead of 2 Corinthians. At one point, he was in a church service in Iowa, and they were passing around the communion plate, and he threw some money in because he thought it was they were collecting the offering. Right? He did not start out as very religiously literate. He has grown in that area. And in fact, he has infused more and more of these kind of religious ideas and identities, and even with the way that they use music at Trump rallies, with even if you were watching any of the Trump rallies in this more recent campaign, they would have this moment of reflection where they played the quote unquote J6 political prisoners singing the national anthem with Donald Trump kind of reciting in the Pledge of Allegiance on the same track. And you could watch people, they had their hands in the air, they were crying, they were having an emotional religious experience. And I think in many ways, Donald Trump has taken on a quasi-messianic relationship to many of his followers. They think that he is anointed by God. They think that he is their savior, that he is going to save America. And he made reference to this in his inaugural address where he talked about God saved me to make America great again. He has played into these narratives and has mastered speaking to these religious audiences and using religious symbolism and rhetoric to keep them captivated and attached to him.
Again, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Much obliged. Octavius in New York, our last caller. I just wanted to get in quickly. I do not use the word privilege just because I think words are accurate. Same thing I was saying before, religion of white supremacy. If we got someone who's lying, it is not really a Christian. I don't use the word privilege because if what we're really talking about is I've said If anyone in their wildest of dreams can imagine Black Lives Matter protesters, maybe some of the wild hooligans at the Seattle Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone from a few years back, they're upset. 2012, Obama doesn't win re-election. Mitt Romney pulls it out somehow. We're mad. We're going to go to D.C. and protest and tear up and, oh, you cheated, Obama. They're going to get mad, and they do all this. And so he loses. Mitt Romney wins. And then Obama comes back and wins in 2016. And all of us who went down and got upset and stormed the Capitol and did everything else, Obama pardons us on day one. What galaxy is that? We walked out of prison on day one. On day one. Black Lives Matter insignias and all. Right on, my brother. Right on. What galaxy is that? But it just happened with white people. That is not privilege. That is power. That is exactly why I say, no, do not use the word privilege. Power. White power. Even enough to get Enrique Tarrio out. And then, do you know, Mr. Taylor, do you know who the only sitting member of Congress to be assassinated while they were in office is?
I actually do not.
Congressman Leo Ryan, California, victim of Jim Jones. Political violence, always going back to Jim Jones here, but thought that was important as well. Let's see. Irie, did you have a question for Mr. Taylor, our last caller?
Hi, salutations. Thank you for taking the call. I just had a quick question about whether or not the people who are a part of these Christian groups is part of the reason why they supported Donald Trump, meaning not the ministers and the people who are obviously like in the profession of promoting religion as a business and a faith, but if the followers of these people, were they supportive of Donald Trump as, I'm trying to get my words right, was it equally important to them, like as far as their concerns about the fulfillment of revelations, as much as it is their racist interests or their racist perspectives?
Can I just clarify? Do you mean, when you say revelations, do you mean the book of Revelation or like ongoing revelations and prophecy that they're receiving?
Well, I mean, if you could speak on both, because I'm familiar with Paula White. Unfortunately, my mother is she listens to Paula White. Yes. But mainly the book, you know, King James Version, as they say. But they're all. I know they get ongoing messages from the ether too. So you could talk about both.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about both. So yes, they very much understand themselves as fulfilling the book of Revelation. They're not. To use a very technical term, they're not dispensationalists. They are not participating in this kind of rapture theology about Jesus is going to come back and rapture people away from the earth. That's not their form of Christian belief. They actually, through the seven mountains, believe that the church is going to conquer the whole world. Is going to take, well, if not the whole world, most of the world before Jesus comes back. And so they are not conventionally evangelical in their approach to the book of Revelation, but it's very, very important for them. In fact, Lance Wallnau will sometimes talk about, and this gives you a sense of their theology, he'll say, you know, when Jesus came the first time, he was meek and mild and a gentle savior, but when he comes back, he's a lion. That's a reference to Revelation, right? That is a reference to the book of Revelation, and Wallnau would say the church right now needs to enact this militant Christ that they read into the book of Revelation. It's also very important for them, though, that they believe they are receiving ongoing revelations. They believe that they are modern day prophets who are receiving direct revelations from God. In fact, even Walnow's claim that Donald Trump is a Cyrus, which is a messianic claim. Cyrus is this Persian emperor in the Bible who is referred to using messianic language. He's called an anointed one, a Mashiach. That's the term where we get the Hebrew word where we get the term Messiah. And so this messianic claim around Donald Trump is more premised on modern revelations, on contemporary revelations, than the way that they read that back into the Bible. It's not so much that they are saying that Donald Trump is prefigured or predicted in the Bible, but more that they have prophecies right now that affirm his anointing.
Briefly, I want to ask this one question. From what you've learned, is there a commingling of Judaism with, because you said messianic, and I understand what that is as far as mainly white Jews, white people who are Jewish practicing a form of Judaism that acknowledges Jesus having come to earth, but is there some type of commingling of the former or the more, the Messiah less, like the Messiah has yet to come? It sounds like they're mixing them both, and that was all I wanted to say or ask. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me try to figure out how to put this succinctly, because it's a very complicated answer, actually. They're in these circles, in part because of their closeness to Messianic Judaism, the many Messianic rabbis, again, who are not recognized as rabbis by the mainstream Jewish communities and traditions, but who are recognized as rabbis within these Messianic communities. Those folks often travel in the same circles. In fact, there are a number of Messianic rabbis who are part of the NAR networks. And so there's been a lot of crossover through Messianic Judaism. So one of the things that you'll notice if you look at the footage of January 6th is there are a lot of Christians blowing shofars, these ram's horns that originate within Jewish liturgical practice, where Jewish people, especially around the high holidays, will use the shofar in their services. Here are Christians blowing shofars. They've appropriated these practices and ideas and objects from Judaism, but they believe that the shofar is a weapon of spiritual warfare that summons the angels from heaven and drives back the forces of evil. So they are not, most of these folks have very, very little interaction with non-Messianic Jews, with Jews who belong to what we would call rabbinic Judaism. But they believe that they are very close to Jews, in part because they have so much connections to these Messianic communities. And if you go to just about any Messianic Jewish congregation in the country, about 75 to 80% of the people there don't even claim Jewish identity. They're almost all Pentecostal and Charismatic Christians.
Thank you.
Much obliged, Irie. Before we let you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening in Baltimore, the hellhole, according to our, once again, president.
It's actually a lovely city. I love Baltimore. I don't know what he's getting at.
I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been to Baltimore, but our president, he speaks so disparagingly about that area. It almost makes me want to avoid Maryland. I was in Maryland not that long ago. I just didn't go to Baltimore. I was smart, see. You write, rather, this is on 250, The Future of American Christianity. I always pick this out because Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, I mentioned her before, her whole premise in terms of her theory, in terms of why people classified as white practice racism. This gets right to it. But you write, finally, the ambient context of this entire book is that around 1990, American Christianity began hemorrhaging adherents. If you followed the General Social Survey, one of the most regular cross-sectional surveys in the United States, you may know that in 1990, approximately 90% of the U.S. population identified as Christian. It dropped sharply to 80% by 1997 and remained stable there for about a decade. Then around 2007, it began falling again, dropping by 63% of Americans identifying as Christians in 2022. As sociologist Robert P. Jones has demonstrated, this drop-off was even more dramatic for white Christians who started the Obama presidency in 2009, making up 54% of the U.S. population, and ended it in 2016 with only 43%. And it has not improved in the 10 years almost since then. And her premise, Dr. Welsing, is that white people, in talking about the world, white people make up on the planet less than 10% of the global population, and because of that, it drives them to dominate that 90% of the non-white population. The missionary work to go out and dominate in the name of white Jesus, that is what is driving this practice of white supremacy, racism, and then bang, it pops up right here. And even I've heard that before as a driving force of a lot of the Trump supporters, and then this is kind of converging with the drop-off, or probably even contributing to the drop-off in the number of white Christians in this part of the world as well. Can you touch on how that's, I guess, further encouraging this, what you call white, or Christian nationalism? I'd say white Christian nationalism, religion of white supremacy?
Yes, absolutely. And Robbie Jones' book about this is called The End of White Christian America. Excellent book. And I highly recommend it. It came out, I think, in either 2017 or 2018, and he's done a couple of other books also dealing with these questions of white Christians since then. As his book, White Too Long. Robbie Jones grew up Southern Baptist and is trying to reckon with the racial history, especially of the Southern Baptist Church. He's a very, very good scholar on these questions. Yes, I think in many ways, if you look at let me make a statement that is hopefully uncontroversial, and then I'll make one that is unfortunately controversial, though I think equally as true. If you look at the surveys in 1990, the census, about just north of 75% of people in the United States identified as white. By 2020, that's down to about 57%, and that drop off in white identification, right, the growing diversity of the United States has produced a backlash of white supremacy and white nationalism. And we saw that manifested on January 6th. If you look at the survey data in 1990, 90% of Americans are identifying as Christian, and that drops down to the lows, about the mid-60s. This is somewhere around 64 to 66% today. And the drop-off in Christian power and dominance has produced a Christian nationalist and a Christian supremacist backlash. Those two backlashes overlapped greatly, and those converged. And what we saw on January 6th was white nationalists, white supremacists, Christian nationalists, Christian supremacists, all trying to put their avatar Donald Trump back in power, and they have now succeeded, unfortunately, 4 years later through an election.
Wow. That is, do you think the white individuals classified as white, do you think increasing numbers of these people seeing, oh wow, our numbers are dropping off, either white Christians or just white people, period, our numbers are dropping off, do you think that's driving more of them to this flagrant, what I'll just call more flagrant displays of racist and violent behavior?
Yes, absolutely. And I think part of what Donald Trump has done is he's given license, right? I think for a long time after the civil rights movement, there was a cultural norm that said, if you're racist, keep it private. If you're racist, don't say that in public. That's what Lance Wallnau and other people are talking about when they talk about political correctness, right? We don't get to be racist in public. Donald Trump has thrown the doors open and said all of that's okay. Let's just let it all out. Let the id out. Say whatever you want. And it has given permission to a lot of people to indulge and to be much more public and overt in their racism. And it's also fueled this persecution complex among white Christians and white nationalists that say we are the ones who are harmed, and so therefore we need to be violent or we need to be politically anti-democratic in order to maintain our grip on power.
Oh, they even say that with the diversity, equity, and inclusion. See, you're talking bad about us. You're hurting our feelings and making us feel guilty, or you don't want to give white people jobs. Yeah, see, you're victimized. Yeah, see, you're beating us up. Yeah. They all the time. Persecution, neurosis, through and through. I forgot. That's right in your face. That was day 1 too. No more of the diversity stuff. Get that out of here too. Pardons into DEI. Man, I learned a ton from the book, even though I didn't know a lot of these religious characters, leaders, and such. But wow, their influence. I guess I had seen a few of these folks, and I'd seen enough January 6th footage and such. I'd heard some of their influence before, but wow, the show for all of that. I'm so much more informed about things I was looking at and not paying attention. The book again, Bible verse, The Violent Take It by Force. Imagine them telling that to a crowd of black people at a church. Come on. Super informative. Even though, man, there's got to be, when you do the second edition, wow. This has to be like a whole chapter or something like, well, everyone's been pardoned, so I don't even know. Wow. We'll just have to see how all this continues, but much obliged for sharing a bit of your time and insight with us with the new administration, Mr. Taylor. You provide a lot of great insight in the text, sir.
Thank you very much, Gus. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
For sure. Mr. Matthew D. Taylor, The Violent Take It by Force. Enjoy your evening, sir.
You too. Thanks a lot.
For sure. Context of White Supremacy. Take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back, wrap up, and tidbits for the rest of the week, broadcast schedule, all that good stuff. Context. Religion. That's what I've been saying for the day, right? Religion of White Supremacy. We'll be right back.
And from the late 1960s, after the death of Martin Luther King and the riots and the upheavals and all like this, and black people with their fists in the air and all like that, and trying to stumble and fumble and find their way and get focus, the white supremacists made a blueprint and put it into action. And that is, I'm going to have these people so confused, they don't even know what they started out to do. And by the late 1970s, they had just about completed it. And we've been on that ever since. And you mentioned something very important. They are more comfortable than ever. But see, it's like making gorillas comfortable in a cage, or monkeys, or pandas. You still got them in a cage, but they're comfortable. See, so give him some bling bling. It's like giving an animal a brand new car and training the animal to ride up and down the street in it. And then you stand back and point at the animal. Like one white man said in the late 1950s. He said he doesn't care what kind of car a Negro has. He said he's still a nigger. And when he rides by in a shiny car, to him, it's just a monkey in a car. White people built a car, put a monkey in it, trained the monkey to drive the car, so now you're looking at a monkey in a car. See, but black people don't see themselves that way. But this is how the white supremacists see us, and they are the ones who run our business. And we have to know that when they look at us, that's what they see. That's what they see. That's what they see. And at a subliminal level, what they see begins to spill over into our brains so that we, at a subliminal level, see each other that way. And indirectly see ourselves that way.
Context of White Supremacy. We'll be here at minimum on Thursday, Catherine Massey Book Club, Dr. Maya Angelou, The Heart of a Woman. Then we'll be back on Friday, Neutralizing Workplace Racism. Saturday, Compensatory Call-In. And then Sunday, got days mixed up, Sunday. Every day, Thursday through Sunday for the rest of the week. Cannot wait. Man. Looking forward. The broadcast today, man, I'm all ready to broadcast. I'm thinking I'm ready to roll and, hoping to do good program. Haven't had a white guest on the broadcast in a minute and getting back in. Should have had a vacation after getting back from Jonestown, but on the grind. And even as I said, I'm glad, this book came out before the election. I was getting ready. I heard of this book literally days before I was leaving to go to LA. And even while I was in California, I did look. This book was in the catalog in the library systems in California, but they didn't have it at the time either. And by the time I got there, it was like the beginning of November, so it had just come out a couple days ago, literally. And they had it on order. So if I'd stayed there long enough, I could have probably got a physical copy while I was there. But it ended up, by the time I came back here, I think I had put an order in for this book. I'm going to have to go back and look. I think I put an order in at the public library here for this book because it wasn't even in the University of Washington library system, and I still don't think it is. But I put an order in for the public library for this book. Got it. I put an order in for the audiobook of this book, also at the public library. Got it. And got the ebook version of the book. So, man, I think all of them, I put the request in, went to California by the time I came back, and I was late on the, wait list, because they only got like 2 or 3 copies. So I was like 10 on the wait list. I guess that's relative. I think that's late when you have like 10 people in front of you, because it took, obviously, I put my request in, it took like, at least 2 months, I think, at least, maybe a little longer, for me to get the book in my hand. So, any hoodles, but time was right and exact. I guess, one, kudos to Seattle Public Library for having great resources, or Seattle area, period. I did not get this from Seattle Public Library, but kudos to Seattle for having great library systems where you can get all kinds of wonderful resources. And I used every version that I had in reading this. I was sitting outside, and it's still so dark here in the morning. I was going to read the hard copy book, and I was like, man, I'm going to strain my eyes trying to read. I need my eyeballs. Like, oh, wait a minute. I do have the e-copy. Whammo. No light needed. Got the screen and lighting, all that good stuff. So I was ready to roll. And then I went to cook. Got to eat well. Go do my cooking, but I still need to read. Audiobook. Whammo. And then I actually brushed because I didn't want to be on the screen the whole time. I don't want to sit outside a little bit. Hard copy book as well. I did a little bit of all three and was really glad that I had the e-copy as well, because I did get a little bit lost about where I found things or where I heard things, and that allowed me to kind of get boom, boom, boom. So I see value to all three and said, man, if you're going to have all three, you had better, like, one, read the whole book, check, and then you had better have, like, some good questions for this. Hopefully right on. At least we covered, lots of subject matter for the text. That said, I'm thinking I'm all prepped and go in and have a great program, be excited and all the rest of it. I think we get like 5 minutes into the program. I've had no Wi-Fi issues, like, at all. Wi-Fi has been totally fine all day long that I've been at my residence. And we had just program on this past Saturday, Friday, Thursday, and even last Monday. It was the Dr. King holiday. No issues, nothing at all. Within 5 minutes. Couldn't even get through the audio intro, and there were audio issues. Whole Wi-Fi, I think, went out for a second. Right there, ominous. we get like 20 minutes into the program, the fire alarm goes off in the building. I'm wigging out because I had my headphones on, so I'm wigging out at first, like, what is, did I have a timer on, or what is going on? And so I'm looking like, what? Oh, there's like, what is going on? Like, so I'm trying to figure out it. Oh my good, like, whoo, it was so, I didn't know if I had to cancel the broadcast and run for my life. What is going on? Like, I'm just so confused. Like, is a piece of toast burning? Like, what is going? Woo! Had to kind of recalibrate and figure out, and then the noise from all that just, man, promise no easy victories. And of course, everything had to go totally haywire as soon as I got ready to try to do some sort of constructive broadcast. So that totally maximum disruption to everything. The Wi-Fi first, and then the fire alarm, just wow. So hopefully try to do my best to drill down. If anything, I am super glad that I did not procrastinate and that I did utilize all copies and resources available to read the book, get my questions and what I wanted to pinpoint from the text to bring forth. I had that in advance and notes together and everything organized so I could try and minimize my own personal discombobulation once we got our guest on the program. All of that said, I guess important points, the privilege, he said that, I think he used that term privilege a few times in the broadcast, Mr. Taylor, and I'm so glad when he got to the end and talked about those pardons and said, yep, that's the power structure. You can get them to pardon and let out all your folks. White people, Enrique Tarrio, that is not, he didn't say the privilege structure. He said it right, the power structure, the white power structure. Let's see. And I do think when we talk about the text, the violent take it by force, I said, now, hey, it could easily be white Christian. Now, he talked about the incorporation of these non-white people in the text. I said, I was just looking. That's why I read all the names out of the people that, are major characters in this text. Paula White, no pun. Lance Wallnow, Dutch Sheets, Cindy Jacobs, Pete Wagner, Sean Foyt, Becca Greenwood, white, and Cheon. He's not even born in the U.S. He's one. In fact, you better have your papers, brother. We don't do that birthright citizenship and all that old nonsense. You better have your papers, brother. But I mean, yeah, I think that is important because I think generally we do not focus on the problem is white people. It becomes diffused. I said it's the same way with the People's Temple. They will say this is not a black church. It was multiracial. That is not true. It was mostly black people, that 900. It was almost exclusively white people in power. Jim Jones at the People's Temple. The planning committee, that was all white. Even though the congregation down there struggling and dying in Jonestown, that's almost exclusively black, exclusively non-white. But that is very common, and hey, the problem is white people in all of this. I was even reminded, because like Mr. Taylor in the book, one of the first things he said, January 6th, is about racism. He has that in the book. Anti-blackness, nativism, that means get out of here. These foreigners, get back across the border, Pedro. And racism, that's first things that he identifies with January 6th. I remember we had victims of racism who came on here proudly and said January 6th had nothing to do with racism. Victims guaranteed quality. Who's more informed about racism? That passage with Paula White, that is one right there. If I had been discombobulated and slacking and not read, been paying attention, that right there. T.D. Jakes, all these black people, they've been kicking it with Paula White all these years. And he said they didn't know her true colors. That's in the Word God. I think I've read it before, so I'm not going to read it right now. But, man,
This isn't no little white girl from California, who tricked you, and she's up on all the Jay-Z and Beyonce and all the rest of it. She listens to all that, and so she just got over y'all because she was young and hip, and she knew all the lingo and such. Like, this is a no-count white chick from Mississippi, Tupelo, Mississippi, and nobody thought, hey, it's kind of close to the Goon Squad, eh? I remember how y'all did Medgar Evers. Just on Medgar Evers, Paula ain't gonna be my homie. What you say her last name is? White. White. That's her last name for real? Miss White. That's what we got to call her? Yeah. I ain't gonna be too chummy with old Miss White. We'll keep an eye on her just to make sure. Since all of you all think she's so cool, I'm gonna be the one to hold out. She'll win me over last. How about that? That didn't happen. Everybody just was in love with them some Paula. T.D. Jakes vouched for them, which is the same thing that happened with Jim Jones. He got a black person to vouch for him in San Francisco. I had to talk to the black dude who explained all that when I went to California. But T.D. Jakes vouches for her, and that's just it. That's why Fuller said, United Independent means United Independent means United Independent. So if everybody here, Jim Jones is cool. He's not even white. That's a black man. That's what they said about Paula White. They said she preached just like a black person. I wanted to throw up. How in the world can that be after Jim Jones? That should never be said again. Like, this white person they not white. They preach like a black person. Whatever that is. That's all of that. What does that mean? Preach like a black. He got that in quotes, so he didn't say that. But I mean, what does that mean? They preach like a black person. What does that mean? They got a bucket of chitlins on the pedestal with them. Like, are you serious? Before I got to the chitlins, the major part though, so 900 people died, and everyone in the world talked about this for days and weeks, most of them black, from a white preacher who people said preached like a black person. We should have some suspicion about this moving forward. Yes? No. We learned something from all this. Yes? No. Irie said, my mama, she with Paula White. Man, she didn't say, my mama thought she was racist for a couple of days, but yeah, Paula came on through. She all right. That's cool, white woman. Who is more informed about racism? Who is more? That's one of the more glaring examples that I've had in a book of like, wow, we didn't just know this white person for a couple of days. We knew this white person for years and can't believe that she's a racist. Confusion is lethal. Let's see. Tidbits, want to make sure. Thought when the portion that he says at the beginning in terms of all of the white support behind all of this violence, that's how they got pardoned. You have white people support the violence of white supremacy, racism. They endorse it. They support it. They rejoice in it. The religion of white supremacy. Let's see. And he didn't have a problem gaining access to these black people even. In fact, since I've been asking our white guests that, I don't recall any white person who has said, yeah, man, the colored folks, they just didn't want to be around me. Like, Baltimore is the lamest place ever, man. You think the wire is tough? Come to Baltimore being a white person. Oh, my God. Like, man, you just see black people just being surly and rude. And then the Ravens lose and they blame it on the white man. Oh, my God, it's the way. That's not what he said. Black people look great. Super welcoming. Hey, man. I'm a black dude. I have never been around black people where they were super welcoming. Like, what? I was there for 5 minutes and they called me a coon. These are cows listeners. He said they were very welcoming as a white man. Did they suspect you of being a racist? Absolutely not. Did they call you any names? How about that? Did they call you any names? Because I cannot think of a single group of black people I've ever been around in my life, including cows listeners, who do not call black people names. So did they call you names? If the answer is no, come on, man. That's why I don't say it. I don't say don't name call. I say, hey, don't name call black people, because we don't name call Mr. Taylor. We don't do that. We don't name call Paula White. That's my white friend, Paula White. I love me some Paula White. Gus, on the other hand, that coon. These are the cows listeners I'm talking about. Let's see. I thought it was important, he said, that the racial showcasing is international. They will grab, Che An wasn't even born here. They'll go and grab some non-white person who was born wherever. And like I said, probably been subject to their missionaries, white race soldiers who traveled all this way and put a biscuit in their mouth when they were 2. And now I love me some white people. Yes, go and spread the gospel. Come on. That's the person that you come and say, oh, well, we're not all white. Wait a minute. We're diverse. We believe in inclusion. Look, don't ask no questions. We're still working on the English. Man. Come on, man. Come on. Let's see. Anything else? I could not imagine black people being encouraged to be violent. A violent form of Negro Christianity. Like, what? That's like Nat Turner. I said last week, like, if you want to impress me, pardon Nat Turner. Other than that, like, you can get out of here with all that other old nonsense. You pardoning live people who went out and attacked police officers and did all this other old terrorist hooligan activity in the nation's capital. Like, get out of here. Ain't no way in the world they'd be going to, especially black people that are victims of white supremacy. You are justified by the Lord Savior himself. Be vengeful and violent. Take the Lord in your hand with thy sheath. Are you serious? Are you serious? You fitting to be like an exponential black identity extremist. Have 15 dossiers on you. Like, man, please. And your whole congregation going to be bugged, shut down, immediately audited by the IRS. He said they weren't even following these folks who participated in all this. White power and confused Negroes who love Paula White. I'm not disparaging them or anything. I'm just saying, what else can you call it? That's facts, right? You've been kicking it for some. If I was kicking it from one of y'all for years and thinking that we are cool, that we buddies on counter racism and what have you, and then they turn around and say, oh yeah, I got to go and support Donald Trump. I got my ticket for the inauguration. Like, whoa, is this a counter racist activity or what are you doing? Oh no, that's my homie. We've been kicking it for a long time. Like, I'm a supporter. Like, wow. I didn't know that. I didn't ask enough questions, or what is going on? Like, I've been confused. I discombobulated. That's what he said. Discombobulated. Let us see. Folks who doubted, this is a 2024 publication where I say you should read new books. The calendar flips, so you got to get a 2025 book. This wouldn't count. Last year, it would have counted. This year, it does not. Got to get one book published in the current calendar year. There are already 2025 books on white supremacy. Got to get at least one that is nonfiction read for lots of reasons. Just, terms that are being used and how this problem is being discussed and lots of current events. January, all the January 6 books that are out there, every victim of white supremacy. I think if you were born in the U.S., you should have read at least one January 6th book. We did our part. We read Harry Dunn. You should read at least one. Maybe bunches of them, but at least one. Folks who dialed in, if you have a commentary to share, thoughts, information was important. I guess I'm asking just personally to make sure that portion about Paula White, well, I guess we got one person, Irish, she said her mom is a Paula White fan, groupie. Did that process, we all able to process and make sense of that, the import of that, black people being confused and homies with Paula White for all of these years? That's one that I did think was, I changed my highlighter color for that one. Other than that, if folks have any of their own thoughts before we wrap up, feel free. Did our full 3 hours. Thoughts, and we had a fire alarm. I can't believe that. Burnt toast and everything. Folks have commentary.
Hey guys, it's Lauren. I don't know. I was thinking just a lot of the same things you were. Through the whole book, he made it seem like it was more non-white people participating in this Christian nationalism. He even said, let me see, the independent, charismatic corner of American Christianity, as we will see, is highly multi-ethnic and even transnational in its orientation. And, you know, that just makes it seem like highly multi-ethnic. I wanted to ask a lot of questions, so I don't want to say, hey, are you saying there's a high percentage of non-white people who are participating in this Christian nationalism? You kind of talked to him about that stuff. Let me see. There was another part where it said it's commonly asserted that Christian nationalism is detached from Christian beliefs. As one popular resource claims, it is a cultural framework that is more about identity than religion. I thought, yeah, it's about being white. And I thought it was kind of weird that he didn't say what the popular resource was. I don't remember it being a footnote right there. I guess I can go back and look, but I don't think he did. I don't know. So yeah, overall it was interesting though. I didn't want to ask too many questions, even though I had like way more highlights. That's it.
For sure. The Christian element is important in terms of what they, because I would not have processed it that way, because a lot of them did say that they were, this is their mission from white Jesus to go and do this, and these are demonic forces allied against Trump. And that is the way that racists view white supremacy. I was thinking the whole time, like Patrice Lumumba, his code name was Satan. Even, in fact, Obezers, his code name for the Secret Service was Renegade. Now, that's not exactly, Diablo, devil, exactly, but I mean, Renegade? That's not choir boy and, hero. Not exactly. Hey, I know. Hey, Gus does know about the Renegade, yes? Yes, that almost sounds like you're an outlaw of some sort. Any other commentary folks want to get in?
Yes, real quick. I did not read the book. I hope that's not a problem. I just saw somebody said you were live, and it interests me, and I have a little bit of experience with this, like all my childhood years being exposed to this type of so-called Christianity. And from what I heard him say, I feel like the book he wrote is just a beginning, view into this type of religiosity that white people practice. And then as far as non-white people being brought in, what I'm able to see is they're brought in because some of them, they start off listening to, your T.D. Jakes and your Clarence McClendons and stuff, but then the marketing gets overlaid with Joel Osteen. I did want to ask about him, but, like you said, for time's sake, like the other callers said, I didn't want to do that. And then I also know a lot of non-white people get exposure to this type of stuff as well through multi-level marketing companies. And that's from personal experience too. And these types of dialogues have come up in those areas of activity, even in employment, because they use that as a tactic. You're supposed to, be rich. You're supposed to be this. You're supposed to be that. And then also, the enemy will come up, because, we're not fighting against flesh and blood. So I think that, something more replete for me would be in order to read or whatever. But I'm interested in reading this book. But it seems like there's a lot of stuff missing. Is what I'm getting at. I hope I'm not being wordy. That's my goal for 2025, not to be too wordy. Yeah, that's it. So thank you. Paula White is a con artist.
Race soldiers generally are extraordinary con artists as it relates to non-white people. They just keep conning us and keep conning us. And yeah, seems like she got a lot of black people. And for even T.D. Jakes, man, I don't... what does it mean to, what Fuller say? The most familiar mystery. And it's even worse here because her name actually is White. Like, what does it mean to be white? And then they can't even put it off. She had that California accent and she brought that surfboard out. No, man. Tupelo, Mississippi, white woman. And then still turn around as well. Them colored folks are right smart about racism. They just, Paula got. I mean, he said Paula just didn't show her true colors. That's all. Now that does put it on the white. No, man. Black people, we are not properly informed about what it means to be classified as white. Octavius in New York, did you have commentary before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one thing when he was discussing in regards to the aspect of Jewish, that was really confusing. I was listening and I was going to ask more questions on for that, but I was just like, you know what? Let me just stick to my own and keep it moving because I kind of don't understand. I didn't understand what he was saying. I don't know if anybody else did, but how can you be the religion and the people? Usually it's one or the other. And I thought, wasn't it like Judaism, doesn't it come from Hebrew? And isn't it Hebrew found in Ethiopia? And isn't that in Africa? I mean, we can go on, but I just left that alone because again, that's a long conversation. But that was basically the thing that I wanted to ask more questions about. I mute my line. Thank you for the show.
For sure. I've heard that so many times when that comes up in terms of what does it mean to be Jewish or a Jew, and he was talking about the cultural aspect of it and the ethnic aspect of it. He didn't even say the racial. That's another one, like Latino. Like, that is not a racial classification. And he was talking about all that. And then I was thinking Sammy Davis Jr. too, because he did say that there are, large number of non-white people who are also so-called Jewish, which is true. We've had some as guests on the program, which, Fuller talks about that as well, which is why you should not use that as a racial classification, because it's not. And it will, as our caller just said, Octavius in New York, like, man, I got confused. Like, what is he? What? What I thought Lauren had asked about that as well. I don't know if she, felt like he was any more precise or if it was equally confusing. But
Yeah, that's why all of that, you have to be very careful. I think individuals classified as white, they strategically, because they are in charge, they can use all that to their advantage. The Latino, Jewish, all of it really, even black, all of it, white, all of it, all of it. They can use all that to their advantage to just cause confusion. And that is Paula White rides off into the sunset, and we sitting around scratching our head. I don't understand. I don't understand. That was my little white sister. I don't understand. And that's why we get ready for Negro History Month again, in the same spot that we were when it started, a century ago, whatever it is at this point. Last century, at least. Much obliged for folks tuning in. We will be back Thursday, minimum. Maybe we get tomorrow off. Whoopee. But Thursday and then rest of the week through Sunday. 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific every day. If you get confused, untiljustice@gmail.com. I guess be careful if you're going to make toast or whatever it is. Be careful. Don't walk away. Safety if you are going to cook, so that you don't disrupt other people's counter-racist activities. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. They were smoking reefer in the Capitol. And then tell us this is a godly act. God wants us to be here to support the anointed, chosen president. The demons, probably related to that no count Obama, the demons are trying to stop us and Trump. Puff, puff, pass, brother. Puff, puff. Like, are you serious? And then they were urinating. Remember that too? Harry Dunn standing my ground, reading all that. Don't tell me this is spiritual. Just because you got a horn and a crucifix, this is spiritual. Littering, urinating, puffing reefer. Like, man, that's another one. Now, if Leroy had said, it's a spiritual and godly experience. We're going to support our brother Obama. We're going to roll us big blunt in the Capitol here. We're going to... Are you serious? Are you serious? Come on, man. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling black people. No gossiping. No throwaway offspring. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.